Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Right. Good morning and welcome to the August 9th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We'll begin by taking attendance, and I'll turn it over to Mark Silverman to call the roll.
Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron. Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Devonshire. Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
All right. Good morning again to the August 9th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This public hearing and meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel. If you would like to testify in any of the public hearing items, you may do so by joining the Zoom meeting at the estimated time that is shown on our agenda, which can be found on our website. And if you would just like to watch the proceedings, you may do so by going to our YouTube channel. And today we have a very full agenda. We are starting with a public meeting item to vote on whether or not to calendar a proposed historic district. And then we will move to the public hearing agenda to review applications for work on designated properties. And finally, we will end the day with a public meeting agenda to review applications for work on designated properties that have already had a public hearing and for which we've already heard testimony and provided comments, and the applicants are back today in response to those comments. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate Lemos-McHale, our Director of Research, to take us through our first item.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, Commissioners. The first item this morning is LP 2664, the proposed Melrose Parkside Historic District in Brooklyn, with boundaries as described in this presentation and written out in the agenda. The proposed Melrose Parkside Historic District is a remarkably cohesive and intact group of 38 single and two-family duplex row houses designed by two of Brooklyn's most prominent architects, Benjamin Driesler and Axel Hedman, for developers William A. Brown and Eli H. Bishop and Son. They were built between 1909 and 1915. The proposed district is located on Parkside Avenue between Flatbush and Bedford Avenues in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn. Of the 38 houses within the proposed district, 20 were constructed as two-family duplexes, sometimes referred to as Kinko houses, a distinctive residential building type that originated in Brooklyn. And an example is shown here on the left. The other 18 houses were constructed as single-family row houses. The proposed historic district has been identified through surveys and in response to a request from property owners to evaluate it, which was accompanied by letters of support and a petition signed by Parkside Avenue property owners. Staff reviewed it both on its own and within a broader study of the neighborhood. The in-depth study found that the proposed district stood out within the neighborhood for its highly intact architectural quality, and in particular for the group of Kinko house duplexes with their artistically designed facades, which we consider among the finest representations of the type in Brooklyn. In the staff's evaluation, the remainder of the block and adjacent blocks contain buildings in a variety of scales, ages, and levels of architectural quality and integrity, which do not contribute to a strong sense of place, and therefore propose a district focused on the row houses, which you see here. We held an owner meeting last year and have received generally good support from property owners as we've continued our study. The name Melrose Parkside is a reflection of the district's history. In 1883, local physician and real estate speculator Homer purchased Melrose Hall, an 18th century manor house and estate located between today's Parkside Avenue, indicated here as Robinson Road, and you can see Melrose Park in the sort of upper left corner of the block. And proposed a suburban development he planned to call Melrose Park. The projected development went unrealized, and in 1886, Bartlett sold most of the property to the wealthy brewer and speculator William Brown. Already active in real estate development in Brooklyn, Brown's son, William Arthur Alexander Brown, began the transformation of the family's holding following his father's death in 1905. Around 1908, the long-mapped Robinson Street was opened, and Brown petitioned the city to rename it Parkside Avenue for its connection to Prospect Park and Ocean Parkway. In addition to the 2 rows of duplex houses designed by Benjamin Driesler, which were completed in 1910, a row of single-family no basement houses by Driesler were in the process of completion in 1912, shown on this map also. The undeveloped portion of the property on the north side was sold to developer Eli Bishop and Son in late 1913, and by 1915, development within the proposed historic district was completed there, with a row of American basement single-family houses designed by Axel Hedman. The dominant house type within the proposed district is the 2-family duplex, an unusual type of row house apparently unique to Brooklyn at this time and popular between 1905 and 1915. Designed as an alternative to the conventional 2-family house, an example is shown above on the left in Sunset Park. The 2-family duplex houses were designed to offer greater privacy. Originated in Brooklyn in 1905 by the Kings and Westchester Land Company and marketed as Kinko houses. Each house, shown on the right, these are within our Crown Heights North 3 historic district, contain 2 totally separate 2-story apartments, each with its own private entrance. Envisioning Parkside Avenue as an exclusive neighborhood of elegant duplex homes, William A. Brown began his project in 1909 at the peak of the duplex's popularity. That year, a Brooklyn Eagle article on Brown's new houses called them, quote, the latest type of modern house building, with artistic and varied fronts of fine architectural design. Brown marketed his new duplex houses on Parkside Avenue as, quote, the most perfect houses ever built for 2 families, yet with the privacy of a 1-family house. Drawing upon the neoclassical vocabulary, architect Benjamin Driesler composed 6 distinct designs to create what were noted in a 1909 advertisement as, quote, the most artistic fronts in greater New York with interiors to match. Each house features twin entrances at the first story, facades with or without bowed or angled bays, and mansard roofs punctuated by dormers in a variety of configurations. The prominent bulkheads on our original features intended to give the residents of the upper apartments access to the roof. In addition, he designed a standalone property at Bedford and Parkside Avenues, taking advantage of the corner site to vary the design by placing each entrance on a separate facade. As interest in the duplex declined due to the expense of construction, Brown in 1912 again turned to Benjamin Driesler to design a row of 8 single-family houses, which he marketed as easy housekeeping, no basement houses. With deep open areaways, the row features full-width terraces and shorter stoops, and an eclectic combination of classically inspired design elements with Jacobean-style stepped gables. They were the last houses in the proposed district developed by Brown, who was that same year announced his retirement from the real estate to concentrate on his brewery business. In late 1913, Eli H. Bishop and Son purchased the undeveloped parcel on the north side of Parkside Avenue for the construction of 10 single-family residences. Designed in the neoclassical style by Axel Hedman in 1914 and completed in 1915, the American basement plan houses at 357 to 375 Parkside Avenue alternate flat, angled, or bowed fronts with prominent central entrances flanked by a window and a service entrance. This map shows the historic typology of the row houses, with the 2 rows of Kinko houses by Driesler built in 1909 to 1910 shown in orange, and rows of single-family row houses that were built subsequently shown in yellow. And again, I'll just note that the apartment buildings on the block were built later for different developers and with lesser architectural quality and integrity, and so are not included in the proposed district. The demographics of Parkside Avenue reflect the historical trends of Flatbush through the 20th century and into the 21st. Promoted in early advertisements as an exclusive neighborhood, residents of the row houses and duplexes on Parkside Avenue through 1950 were white and predominantly born in the United States and included households headed by doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, businessmen, musicians, and artists. Among the block's longtime residents was Ella Boole, pictured here, an ardent prohibitionist and president of the World Women's Christian Temperance Union. She lived at 377 Parkside Avenue from 1922 until her death in 1952. Following a trend that was seen in other residential communities, some residents began sharing their large apartments with roomers, boarders, and lodgers in the 1920s. And beginning in the 1930s, many of the duplexes were being subdivided into multiple rental units or combined office residences for doctors. By the mid-19th century, Flatbush saw a large increase in African-American and Afro-Caribbean residents as Black families moved into the area from other neighborhoods in New York, such as Central Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant. Central Brooklyn soon became the center of the city's Afro-Caribbean community, and by the 1980s was a major destination for migrants from Caribbean countries. Today, Parkside Avenue continues to reflect the diversity of Greater Flatbush. The proposed historic district's property owners have maintained the houses here very sensitively, and as a result, the proposed district has a very intact historic character. Based on the high quality of the architectural design and the level of integrity that contribute to the proposed district's sense of place, the research department recommends the commission vote to add the Melrose Parkside Historic District to its calendar for designation. And I'd like to thank Mary Ann Percival for her work on this, and she's here also with me to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So commissioners, do we have any questions for Kate or Mary Ann? Okay, not seeing any questions. I'm going to start to request to unmute you. This is another, kind of exciting neighborhood because we've been talking to many of the owners for a long time now, and there's a lot of pride of place here in this group. This group of buildings is sort of a kind of a standout in the larger neighborhood. We've started to engage the council member who also sort of right away said, yes, I know those houses. So they are really a kind of a standout and recognizable within the block. And I'm just excited that we're working with another group of property owners that seems to really embrace the historic character of their streetscape. So I would like to ask that we move to calendar this. Oh yes, Commissioner Bland, please go ahead.
Thank you for a late question that I should have asked a minute ago of Kate. I'm interested in the plans. It's a personal interest, has nothing to do with the landmarking issue, but I have made, as many have in Brooklyn Heights, a two-family out of originally a one-family, and I'm just interested in the plans since these were built initially as two families. So if Kate, you could, you must have some plans of these houses. I'd love to see them if you do.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So with that, Vice Chair Bland, would you make a motion to calendar this historic district?
I will, very happily, and so nice to hear that the residents seem to support this.
All right, great. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, this Melrose Parkside Historic District is calendared for consideration, and we'll hold a public hearing early in the fall. All right, we'll now move to our Preservation Department agenda.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. We'll start today's Preservation Department public hearing agenda with public hearing item number 1, LPC 23-00030, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 635, Lot 5, 7741 Washington Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. This is a 2-story commercial building built in 1912 to 13, and the application is to construct a rooftop addition and alter masonry openings.
And we're just bringing in the applicant team, so just give us a moment. Okay, I believe the applicants are all here. You now have control of presentation. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Good morning. I guess it's me. Hi, I'm Adam Weinberg, the Alice Pratt Brown Director of the Whitney Museum. Thank you so much for hearing us today. The project we present today concerns the creation of a home for the Whitney's Independent Study Program at 945 Washington Street. The Whitney's Independent Study Program is a postgraduate program for artists, curators, and writers that was founded more than 50 years ago and has lived in multiple rented facilities in far-flung locations in downtown New York City. Now, thanks to the incredible generosity of Dorothy Lichtenstein, wife of the late great pop artist Roy Lichtenstein, the Whitney Independent Study Program will have a permanent home just 4 blocks from the museum in a former factory building of 1912-1913 that housed the artist's home and studio. As the story of this project begins with Dorothy and Roy, I would like to introduce Dorothy to just say a few words before we continue with the presentation today. Thank you so much, Dorothy, for your gift to the Whitney, for future generations of artists and art historians, to Greenwich Village and the city of New York. Dorothy, can you join us?
Okay,
Hi
thank
there.
hi, thank you, Adam, and good morning, commissioners. I am Dorothy Lichtenstein, and it gives me great pleasure to join you here today. My late husband, Roy, and I moved into this building in 1988 after we converted it from its prior use as a garage and metal shop into a residence and workspace. We made it our home in New York for the decades that followed. We've long considered what will become of the building, and I'm thrilled that the Independent Study Program will be located in Roy's studio following my gift to the Whitney Museum. I could not be more excited about the Whitney's use of the building as the permanent home for its Independent Study Program, which has such a rich and distinguished history in arts and education. Roy has a long history with the Whitney, including as a seminar leader at the ISP, which makes the gift all the more fitting and appropriate. I'm honored that his legacy of creativity and art making will continue at this location, and I hope students are inspired by the fact that it was used by Roy. My sincere desire is that this building will enable a future generation of artists, curators, and scholars to flourish. I've had the privilege of meeting with Sharon Johnson and Mark Lee, the architects of the renovation. As a future neighbor, since I still will retain buildings to either side, I find their design compelling, respectful, and harmonious with the existing building and neighborhood. I cannot think of a better future for the building or a better way to honor Roy's legacy. Adam?
Dorothy, thank you so much. Thank you for your words. And also, again, thank you for your great generosity and your leadership. It's really touching to all of us. Thank you. So I will now continue briefly with an intro about the Independent Study Program, followed by a discussion of the history and context of the building by Erin Ruley, who is a principal at Higgins Quaysbarth, and then a presentation of the proposed changes to preserve the building as a site for working artists that will address their needs in the coming generations from Sharon Johnston of Johnston Markley Architects. May I have the first slide, please, from my team? Very good. Next one there. Very good. The Whitney starts in the studio. It starts actually with Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in her studio on 8th Street, which is the home of the studio school. And the reason that this project is so particularly important and appealing to us is, of all the museums in New York, the Whitney was founded by an artist. And it was founded in her studio. It was the home of exhibitions. It was the home of artists who were working right there on McDougal Alley. And it eventually became the Whitney Museum through her largesse. Now, with the gift of Roy Lichtenstein's studio, the idea of a studio as the center of the museum, 4 blocks away from the current Whitney building, will continue to persist and inform the making of artists for the future generations. So we're really thrilled by it. And there's a great picture of Roy there, surrounded by the energy and the wonderful images that he produced. Next slide, please. The Independent Study Program has been around since the mid-1960s. It is considered one of the most elite programs in America, with 25 students per year. And as you can see on the left, you see a photograph with the artist Donald Judd, who lived here in downtown New York, who was teaching a seminar. And to his right, you can see one of the many illustrious people who was a young skeptical artist named Julian Schnabel, who we also know as a resident of the neighborhood not far from the studio. On your right, you see just a very small selection of curators, writers, artists who are mostly New Yorkers, ranging from Roberta Smith at the New York Times and Lisa Phillips, the director of the new museum, to artists such as Glenn Ligon, who resides downtown New York. Dozens and dozens of artists and writers, critics, and directors have been spawned from this program. Next. And just, I think, the most important context for us, and one of the reasons we were so excited to move the Whitney Museum from the Breuer Building uptown to downtown in 2015, was that this was always and has been and persists to be an artist neighborhood. And what you're looking at here is just a small map of the artists, the names who in yellow, who inhabited the greater district. And I say greater because it extends up to Chelsea and obviously farther east. But it gives you a sense that this has always been an artist for neighborhoods. And those in pink are artists who currently have their studios here. And I feel very importantly, and we all do, I think, as residents of this neighborhood, that the idea that artists being part of the currency of the neighborhood, which draws people to this neighborhood, continues to be a place of production and not for artists, is essential to the future character of the neighborhood. And it's no accident that Roy's studio is directly across the street from West Beth Artist Housing, which is the largest public artist housing project in America. And so that synergy with the Whitney, with many of the artist spaces, and of course West Beth, is something that will help to continue this artist legacy for many, many years to come. And I think we have one more slide here. It began with Dorothy, it ends with Dorothy. You don't have to look. I think it's a very lovely picture, but I just wanted to say Dorothy is an extraordinary human being who has been a resident of this neighborhood for the longest time, and it wouldn't be happening without her. And Dorothy, I just want to express my great appreciation to you yet again. So I'm happy now. Last slide, just to show you, this is the proposed project. You're going to hear all about its historic context from Erin now. But as you can see, it's something that sits very comfortably in the neighborhood, much smaller than many of its other buildings, and is a wonderful kind of fit within a neighborhood that is both residential and has a long industrial history that has often been used for artist housing. So Erin Ruley, please take it away, and I will sit back and enjoy. Thank you all for the commissioners.
Great.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. Erin Ruley, Higgins Quays Barth and Partners. Good morning, commissioners. I think I'm going to start here on the rendering just to share some of our thinking about the project's appropriateness. It's really rooted in three basic ideas, and we'll explore these themes throughout the presentation. But first, that this project embraces the artistic and intellectual legacy of Roy Lichtenstein, as both Adam and Dorothy have pointed out, and also the broader history of artists' reuse of buildings in Greenwich Village. This is a design that is informed by how this specific building has evolved over time, and in the context of a diverse architectural record of this section of the historic district. And then finally, this is a carefully crafted piece of contemporary architecture, one that distills and interprets the architectural language of the existing building, which we believe has a place here. I think, Julie, we can go to the overview of the scope of work. Great. So here we have an overview of the proposed scope of work. There's a range of work that's going to be reviewed by at the staff level, but the scope before you today is there are sort of three primary parts: converting the loading door at the ground floor. You see that on the south side of the building. That will be converted with window infill to match the existing bay to the north, which was converted in the 1970s. With commission approval. And the bulkheads will be infilled with brick at that location, in both locations, to match the surrounding brick masonry. At the third floor, the proposed addition, which is really an expansion of the existing third floor space. So this will provide a new studio space and live work area for the artist in residence, which will be the residential space is more located on the existing third floor extension. And there's a significant amount of floor area available on the site. And this addition really represents just the minimum needed for the program. You'll see as we get into the plans that a large amount of the area is consumed by the introduction of compliant stair and elevators for the public use of the building. And this addition really just extends that living area. It's contiguous to the residential space and is the minimum needed in that context. The roof of the addition will not be occupied. So the railing that you see there is strictly a code required guardrail, and it's pushed back the maximum allowable to limit the visibility. On the south wing of the existing third floor, there's a stair bulkhead and an elevator bulkhead, and there are associated chimney extensions. So there's one on the subject building at the northeast corner, and then there are two on Dorothy's house at 739. So on the south side of the lot, you see two chimney extensions there. I'd also like to add that the design we're seeing today has really benefited from a robust community discussion, both with landmark staff, the neighbors, Village Preservation, and Community Board 2. And based on the specific comments of Community Board 2, we made three important design changes from the earlier version of the design. That includes the addition of the central window at the third floor extension. And that really reflects the rhythm of the bays below. The window surrounds have been refined and to add detail and texture. And the addition has been set back from the parapet to allow for a clear reading of the historic volume and parapet. So we think these changes are all quite successful, and we've appreciated the constructive conversations that have led to this. And so I think from here, we'll jump into the project's historic and physical context. First, a look at how artists have used and inhabited buildings in the village over time. This has evolved in two types of buildings historically, primarily, the small scale residential buildings and the later larger scale industrial buildings. Begins with the top left with the conversion of residential buildings with studio windows in the early 20th century. And this is a great view that really shows you the variety of treatments and window types that were employed to provide light and sometimes height to those interior spaces. But the scale is very much in that sort of residential character. On the top right is the original Whitney Museum of American Art, founded by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in 1930. And Adam was talking about her studio space, which connected at the rear of the building. So her studio was on the alley and the museum fronted onto West 8th Street. This was a group of merged residential buildings. So the interiors were merged, the facades were modified to create this uniform architectural expression that we see here. And this was really an endeavor that balanced the building's architecture with a certain freedom to accommodate the artistic function, the new artistic function of the buildings. But what is perhaps most relevant to our project is the way in which artists in the post-war period gravitated to larger, well-lit spaces and established studios in industrial buildings. On the bottom left, we see West Beth Artist Housing. So this was constructed originally, as you all know, as a complex of buildings for Western Electric and Bell Labs, and then converted in 1970 for live workspace for artists. And the architect of that project was Richard Meyer. And of course, this is directly across the street from 741 to 745 Washington Street, where Dorothy and Roy converted the former industrial building to studio and residence in 1987. So there's a certain evolution that we see here as to how artists have lived and worked in the village. Great, thanks, Julie. 741 was originally constructed in 1912 as a warehouse and an office building for a steel and iron concern. On the left, we see an early map in 1921 and the tax photo on the right. The map is really interesting because it shows you the original massing of the building. You see that sort of two-story section at the front, at the street wall, and then the one-story extension that extends to the full lot line. And so the warehouse occupied the ground floor, and it was lit by those two large skylights that you see in the map. And the second story was for office use. In the tax photograph, you can see how that's expressed on the facade. So the ground floor, those large scale utilitarian openings, and the second floor office spaces, which are at a slightly finer scale. The map also starts to speak to the character of the district in this section of the district. So you see the footprints of the earlier residential buildings interspersed with the later industrial buildings, which really becomes a characteristic of this section. Also of note, and maybe Julie, you can point to these two buildings, the backdrop of the two large brick warehouse buildings. There is a building on Bank 123 Bank and then 35 Bethune. These are roughly 6-story industrial factory buildings that create a backdrop to the site. And you'll see this as we get into the architectural presentation a bit more. But also of note, which is not part of our project, but you'll notice the one-story building to the north of 741. And that was constructed in 1916 and functioned as an ancillary building to 741. It's Dorothy also controls that building, but the design extends that of 741, but it's an early example of how the commercial buildings were continuously evolving to serve the practical uses of the concerns within. So next slide. Dorothy and Roy acquired the building in 1986 and converted it for use as Roy's workspace and their personal residence. On the left is a view of the building from the late 1980s when the Lichtensteins acquired it. So you can see that north bay of the north loading bay had already been converted for windows by that time. And on the right is Roy in his studio, surrounded by his interior series, feet on the rug above Roy inhabiting this space within the place. It's really kind of magical and speaks to the spirit of I think both Roy and this environment. Roy passed away in 1997, and since that time, the studio has been home to the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. Great. Like so many of the industrial buildings in the historic district, this building has evolved over time. Here we see a series of 4 additions that have been made to the building, 2 very early ones, 1937 and 1941, that expanded the original office use of the space for the warehouse and commercial concern. And then in 1987 and 1990, 2 additions by the Lichtensteins to expand the residential use for their project. The additions we see in the photo on the left, we're looking south here across the green roof. Additions are executed in brick with punched openings, and this really establishes a pattern and vocabulary for expansion that informs our design approach. The green roof you see and the sculptural skylights were all part of a project beginning in 2008 for the foundation. All of this will remain. These skylights light the studio below, and Dorothy, you'll notice the sculpture in the foreground, one of Roy's brushstroke sculptures. Dorothy has also donated this, so it will remain on the site as part of the project. Next slide. So just looking at the overall existing conditions of the building, it's very restrained in design, but there are 2 languages interacting. If we look closely at the actual existing fabric, there are 2 languages speaking to the varying uses of the building. That industrial scale of the openings at the ground floor with their simple utilitarian detailing. And then at the second floor, the smaller scale, slightly more ornamental, but consistent with the office uses within. And then they're divided by this broad planar expanse of brickwork between. And I think as we get into the details of the studio edition, what you'll see is that it also reflects its program much in the way that the existing building does, and the details are really rooted in the existing fabric that we see here. And then just sort of stepping back a bit to think about the broader context, both of the block and the immediate vicinity. And there is a incredible architectural diversity of scale, period, and building type that occurs in this section of the district. And here we see how that diversity came to be. The character is really defined by the evolution of commerce on the Hudson River waterfront. And so in this 1924 aerial photo that we see at the center of the view, this section of the village is hemmed in by the Greenwich Village the Greenwich Street elevated to the east, and the working piers on the waterfront to the west. And those conditions created a density of industrial and commercial buildings in the area. And then in the surrounding photos, we see how that manifested in the buildings. At the top left, the view of the west side of Washington Street, which had been entirely cleared in the 1930s for the construction of the High Line, with the exception of Westbeth. So the west side of Washington Street is outside of the historic district because of this defining change. There was no historic fabric remaining at that time. And Westbeth, of course, immediately across the street from the site is an individual landmark. On the top right is a view looking along Bethune Street. So there's that 6-story factory building that I mentioned in the map. This is a view from Washington showing you that the contrast between the tall industrial building and the smaller scale Greek Revival buildings that front the block there. And then finally, a view looking north along Washington Street, where we see a garage building and that boundary that's created by the construction of the High Line. And then finally, how we see that context today, the diversity of scale and type in this block and the immediate context. On the left is Westbeth. It's of course a complex of buildings, but there is a rhythm and life to that complex itself, the component parts, and how that has evolved, including the integration of the High Line, which went through the building. They removed sections of the building to allow for passage of the High Line. And at the view to the right is the 5-story tenement on our corner. This is the corner of Bank Street. So that juxtaposition of the late 19th century and the mid 19th century Greek Revival row houses. Moving up 1 block to the north at the top right, we see this amazing sandwich of 19th century row houses, late 19th century tenement, and then a 1930s freight terminal. And so And then finally, just ending on Bethune Street. So this is the existing condition of the historic view that we just saw, the 6-story industrial building juxtaposed with the Greek Revival row houses. And I think what's important here is not just the characteristic juxtapositions that we see, but also that commercial building type is not defined by a specific size or scale, unlike row houses and tenements. So we see 3 examples in the very immediate context of that variety. And I think that the addition at 741 does not fundamentally change the legibility of that commercial building type that we see here in great variation. So now that we've traveled through time and I've brought you into the present, I think this is a good place for me to ask Sharon to share with you the specifics of the design.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everybody. I'm Sharon Johnston from Johnston Markley. And just by brief introduction to say that our career has really been focused on buildings for the arts, arts education, arts production, and the presentation of art in museums, and with a particular focus on adaptive reuse. So I think we're bringing all of those skills and experience to this special project for the Whitney. You can advance, Julie. Thank you. So I first want to introduce you to the project. Erin will come back and just walk us through some orienting views with the mock-up, and then I'll conclude with some more details of our proposal. So here is the existing building that we've seen in photographs. And I just want to highlight a few things. Erin talked about the windows highlighted in at the base of the building, our intention to remove the garage door and replace it with the new window that mirrors that on the north. The removal of the gate to, I think, make a more maybe friendly and wider scale sidewalk. And lastly, the bulkhead that you can see in the back that's part of the stair and the existing residence at the back of the building, all of which is kind of set back from the variegated parapet that really defines and brings a lot of detail to the facade. So in the next slide, you'll see the delineation of our proposal. The artist studio, as we've said, is an addition that really adds to the residential space on the 3rd floor in the back of the building. I'll get into some more of the details, but just to highlight again how we're restoring a kind of symmetry and order at the base of the building with the new windows, the infill brick details, and a few additional details around the entry to the building, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail with some renderings. And then you can see some of the chimneys and other elements that are discreetly placed in the back. So that sort of quietness and simplicity of the new massing in relation to the details of the historic factory facade. Next, please. Just maybe as a way to maybe summarize our thinking, I think is captured in this diagram through sort of 4 key strategies that what we think bring harmony and find the right balance between highlighting and foregrounding the factory facade in relation to the addition. And the first in the upper left is through use, that we're in a way bringing back and balancing the industrial use used by Roy as a studio and our proposal for the artist studios on the ground floor with the single artist studio on the roof, and that's sandwiched by the more intimately scaled, almost residential in scale meeting spaces in the middle floor. That's, I think, represented also by the window scales that Erin talked a little bit about. On the upper right, we bring back an order of symmetry at the base of the building by reintroducing the window on that south opening where the garage door was. And then on the lower left, repeating a kind of language of recessed windows that brings a kind of sense of weight and definition, not only through the brick detailing, but through the way the window sits in the facade. And then lastly, on the lower right, while we want to preserve the sort of predominance of the horizontal order of the factory facade, we've thought carefully about the placement of the windows, both functionally for the interior function of the artist studio on the roof, but also in the kind of latent vertical order in relationship to the windows on the lower level of the building. So if we could go to the next slide. So I think as you've probably can hear already, our intention is very much to kind of preserve the lineage and legacy and texture and grain of the historic factory building. And we think in the next slide, our proposal does that both through the way in which we introduce the massing. It's a simple elemental form, very much in the language of the other the existing residents and the sort of industrial elements of the bulkheads, both in our building and some of the other spaces that you see in the back of the blocks around this neighborhood. Also through materials where, as you'll see in some details forthcoming, we're proposing a brick facade, but a sort of quieter brick, a brick that allows the texture and variation of the factory facade to remain foregrounded, introducing details around the window fenestration and the windows themselves that are intended to both respond very directly to the function of this space as an artist studio. So introducing ample light, but at the same time balancing the need for wall space for contemporary artists who work in so many different mediums. Next, I think now Erin will just walk us through these orienting slides that capture the mock-ups and the rendered views, so everyone is really clear about the position of the project in the neighborhood, and I'll follow up with some last details.
Sure. Thanks, Sharon. I like to think about this as finalizing the macro before we get into the micro. We did a very simple mock-up, understanding that the addition is visible. And so really this was to test our renderings to make sure that we were representing everything accurately. So we see on the left the photograph of the mock-up, and on the right the rendered view. And so in this view, immediately in front of the building, we see the addition, and then that is one of the chimney extensions that's required as part of the project. Next slide. Here, just moving a little bit to the north along Washington Street, we'll have a seasonal view in this shot. So you can see we have a dense cover of tree right now, but within that is rendered the volume of the addition that will be visible when the trees are not leafed out. Next slide. And then here, moving just a bit closer from the corner of Bethune, we see the addition again over the existing parapet line. Next slide. Great. And then moving just a bit to the south, here we see the side elevation of the addition and the front chimney extension. And we also sort of get a peak of the rear chimney extension, and that is all viewed in the context of the other rooftop elements and sort of accretions in the roofscape there. And then also continuing that view just a bit farther west on Bank Street, we get a peak of the side elevation of the addition and the rear chimney extension, exactly. And I think also in this view, we start to get a hint of the stair bulkhead, which is set back on the third floor, existing third floor. And that is again viewed in the context of all of that background roofscape and very active roofscape of the village. And the final view, there's a break in the street wall along Bank Street. And so over that break, we see the proposed stair bulkhead and the guardrail that will need to be extended along the roof of the existing third story. And so I think back to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Erin. So as much as we've been thinking really about the sort of internal order of the existing building, we've also been looking carefully at the context. And I think what's notable for us is that this is an eclectic scale, materiality, and of course use. And as we know, Westbeth is across the street, and so it's that kind of variation that offers clues for us for our approach. So in the next slide, I think what you can see is on the one hand, we're responsive to the Greek revival of our neighbors, and at the same time acknowledging the scale not only of Westbeth across the street, but the rather large scale that's captured here of some of the blind facades that are deeper in the block that we're seeing from across the street. And so I think in the next slide, here we're on the street, we're walking north. And I think what you can see is really, of course, the kind of way in which our proposal really sits back a bit from the facade, and that, as I'll show in some subsequent slides, the texture and grain of the existing factory facade is really what remains the sort of dominant street presence. And as we set back, we also kind of simplify and find a finer grain of texture for the brick. So here we are. I just want to say a few words about our approach to the use of brick. As Aaron noted, we're really extending the sort of language of brick that has existed not only at the urban scale, but within the evolution of the additions to the building. So the kind of beautiful sort of rough and variegated tonal texture of the existing building brick is of course maintained, and our approach is to reorient the brick of the addition for what's called a sailor course. So it's a vertical orientation, and by introducing a slightly finer grain, we once again harmonize but allow to sort of deference to the existing factory facade. And you can see just how the windows sit in relationship to that beautiful variegated parapet. They sit right in the middle of that. So finding that kind of symmetry moment locally, and then of course overall. You can see also, just note quickly, the base brick is restored below the existing building. So a lot of subtle details that we pick up on to sort of bring back the clarity of the existing building. Thank you. Next slide. We've been studying the brick carefully. We're looking for a kind of slightly more uniform brick tone, once again, to allow this beautiful texture to be foregrounded of the existing facade, the vertical orientation, but we're looking for a brick that has a kind of beautiful craft. It'll be a solid brick because of our approach with the cut and vertical order that we're proposing. Next slide, please. Just a few details that we wanted to highlight at the base of the building, not only infilling below the existing north window, we're proposing a new plaque that honors and recognizes the legacy of the Lichtenstein family and Roy's studio here, a new simple light, and a security camera. So all very discrete elements that signal the point of entry and so forth. Next slide. Just a few notes also about the detailing, not only at the base, but here at the roof. We've proposed to set the windows back. Not only the massing of the building, but the windows are further set back to reinforce that sort of shadow language of the openings that exists. And you can see some of the additional details we're picking up to create a little bit more articulation around the window, reinforce the verticality, and it picks up on the sort of embossing and debossing of in that sort of eyebrow above the second floor windows in the existing building. And then the diagram on the left of the slide indicates a proposed further detail that we're looking at on the north elevation of the studio to articulate it as a massing that's sitting on top of that somewhat blind facade that sits above the garage that is just north of our building. So subtle details that reinforce both the harmony and discrete nature of the addition. Next slide, please. And just to highlight some of the points Aaron brought up, as we indicated and is rendered here in the darker gray, those are the existing walls. So there was an existing residence on the third floor. And so we've made a lot of effort to preserve that function of the bedrooms and such, and the bathrooms in the back, and located the new stair and elevators in the back of the building so that their bulkheads are more discreet from the street. And so what's on Washington Street on the west side is really just the artist working spaces. So we're extending the lineage of that second floor space below and preserving the open space of the green roof above the ground floor. Next slide, please. And I think that carries through to our approach to the roof planning, where we're consolidating all of the infrastructure and MEP equipment out of view. And then, of course, the bulkheads that you can see there, we've called out those heights, but really trying to make a very well-ordered and simple roof plan commensurate with the other planning of the building. Next slide. Yeah, I think also just a few key points about the section. We're making quite a intense attempt to really align the new program with the proportions of the existing building. So the artist studios are placed where Roy's studio was, the great light and not double height, but large volume on the ground floor, along with the seminar room. informal meeting spaces are on that middle floor, almost, really mirroring the residential scale of that floor. And then the artist studio sits on the rooftop. It's an 11-foot clear ceiling, which we think is modest in a way by contemporary artist standards, but works very well within the overall proportion of the building. And lastly, we made an effort to really simplify the placement of the artist studio for an economy of means of working with the existing structure and the bearing lines of that section. And then I think just to conclude, I want to just highlight that our attempt here has really been to bring harmony with the diverse layers, not only of the building's history, but the urban context. And we think by bringing this new contemporary use and building form, it fits seamlessly within the lineage, not only of this building, but also the evolving use of the neighborhood. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you all.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for a very well laid out comprehensive presentation. Commissioners,
Thank you, Sarah.
thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions at this time? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead.
Do you have a sightline diagram from across Washington Street showing the sight lines?
Do you mean directly across the street? Perhaps
Correct.
we can, yeah, we don't. Unfortunately, we didn't do the direct view because we're covered. There's perhaps in perpetuity scaffolding at Westbeth, but perhaps it's fairly close to the elevation. So perhaps we can just jump back to the frontal view of the rendering.
Well, it's
This is elevated.
It's difficult that we see how much of the addition is viewed from across the street, and I don't see that diagram anyway.
I guess I would think of it not as a question about visibility because it really sits just behind the parapet. It's really a question of whether it's appropriate to have a third floor on this building. And so that's the way I would think about it. I would assume that that third floor is going to be largely visible in its entirety. And we're thinking about this as a third floor to this industrial type building.
And you should know, we gave a presentation at Westbeth for the residents of Westbeth in the neighborhood and shared a lot of these images with them as well.
So we should disregard the block, the row itself, because obviously it breaks up the row. That's the concept. But
Right. I think you would be thinking about whether a third story in this context would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. So why don't we move to public testimony, and we may have more questions after that. So if you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. We will, as always, start with anyone who signed up in advance and get to everyone else, but whether or not you signed up, but please raise your hand so that we can locate you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. So we do have a number of speakers signed up in advance. Our first speaker will be Gabriela Valero Arias, and I will be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, please go ahead.
My name is Gabriela Valero, and I am here on behalf of Annabelle Seldorf from Seldorf Architects in New York City. I will be reading her letter of support for this docket. Dear Sarah, Carol, and commissioners, it is my sincere pleasure to write this letter of support for the Whitney Museum of American Art's application for modifications to 745 Washington Street in Greenwich Village to accommodate the building to be the permanent home of the Whitney's Independent Study Program, ISP. I am writing both in my capacity as an architect who has designed numerous similar projects in historic districts in the city, but also as a 20-year-plus resident of Greenwich Village. I find Johnston Markley's designs to be thoughtful, sensitive, and wholly in keeping with the character of the neighborhood in scale, materiality, and detailing. The scale of the rooftop addition is modest and driven by the new programmatic needs of the building, including providing ADA access to all levels of the building. I am also particularly impressed by the very considered selection of the brick for the addition, including its color and cursing. The history of the village is as a place of artistic production and inquiry is significant and legendary. Gentrification and changing development patterns have made it unaffordable for most working artists, particularly those at the start of their careers. I cannot think of a more fitting outcome than for the former studio of Roy Lichtenstein to be repurposed for the independent study program. This will enable a new generation of artists, curators, and critics to not only develop their personal expression and practice, but to contribute to the diversity of thought that makes New York City a world-class center for creative expression in all forms. It is exactly this vibrancy and artistic energy that will allow the city to continue to thrive and attract other young artists, just as Roy Lichtenstein, Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, and their cohorts were drawn to the city in the 1950s and 60s. I strongly encourage the commissioners to give the project your full support. With best wishes, Annabelle Seldorf. Thank you so much for hearing me today.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Anna Markham from Village Preservation, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Anna, are you able to unmute your line? Perhaps she's having some technical difficulties. We can move to the next speaker, Todd Williams. Todd, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm Todd Williams. I applaud this project on every single possible count. I speak both for myself and my wife and partner, Billy Chen, who have the greatest admiration not only for the Whitney Museum and its independent study program, for which we actually did the downtown branch back in the 80s, but for Johnston and Markley, Sharon and Mark and their studio, and the extraordinary work they do. And in this particular case, for the work on this project. I know it very well, I should say. I first moved into New York 55 years ago, this exact month, to work on Westbeth. I was Richard Meyer's third person in the studio, and I then spent the next 6 months measuring the building and feel I know it very, very well. In fact, my wife and I, at that time, and our 2 young children, were the very first residents in the building, and love this area. So, and also am great admirers, as I say, for the texture, the sensibility of this part of the city, which is holding strong as possible to its historic past, and at the same time bringing itself into the present. The one last word, where the independent study program, which has been around for so many years, actually needs this and this is an extraordinary opportunity for it to continue its great legacy of inspiring curators and artists and a dialogue at the very highest level. So once again, thank you, Dorothy, and thank you to the foundation for all you've done. I couldn't admire this more. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anna, were you able to try again? If you could unmute your line and state your name for the record.
Sonia, I'm not sure if you saw, but Anna was giving testimony, I think.
I know, I just couldn't, we can't hear her. So maybe, Anna, if you could log off and log back on, then we can call you. And in the meantime, Christina Conroy will be next. And Christina, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And Christina, if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, good morning, commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes preservation of our historic districts, individual landmarks, interiors, and civic art. Now, regarding the changes proposed at the ground floor of this building, we recommend that the bulkheads of the two former large loading bay openings be of an infill material other than brick to better reflect the historic condition. We do not find the proposed third floor addition to be appropriate. The references to the existing building are far too subtle to allow the addition to have a comfortable architectural relationship with it. The addition is neither of the building, nor is it a utilitarian second addition that recedes into the background. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Anna, if you could unmute your line. Hopefully this works.
Hello, I'm so sorry for the technical difficulty, everyone. My apologies. So I will start over. Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Anna Markham, and I'm the Director of Research and Preservation for Village Preservation. I'm speaking on behalf of the organization today. Village Preservation is thrilled that the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program will be moving into the Roy Lichtenstein studio. This project helps preserve and celebrate the cultural heritage of the arts in Greenwich Village. This is a welcome addition and a boon to both the neighborhood and New York City. We also greatly appreciate that the Whitney engaged in an extensive dialogue with us and other community organizations as part of the design process. Through this process, they have made some thoughtful refinements to the design that clearly respond to some of that feedback. Regarding the design before you today, the Village Preservation Committee, which reviewed the application fully and unanimously supported the proposed renovations to the facade and rear of the buildings. We felt these were thoughtfully articulated and in some cases an improvement over the current conditions. Regarding the proposed addition to the Washington Street building, there was more of a diversity of opinions. Our Preservation Committee unanimously felt the version being presented today is an improvement over the version presented to the Community Board, and many believed it meets the required standard of appropriate for approval. Many were especially appreciative of the use of handmade bricks and the addition of the central window to tie the rhythm of the upper floor in with the rest of the building. However, others on our committee believe that the proposed new addition still appears too heavy and too much like a repeat of the base of the building. Concerns among some also included that the proposed design neither contrasts sufficiently as a new addition, nor does it blend enough to look like an organic extension of the existing historic building. Some committee members were also concerned with the lack of aesthetic cohesion in the vertical orientation of the brick on the addition and with the use of striping on the sidewall. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this design.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Rory Keeley. Rory, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I am Rory. I'm the manager of museum administration at the Whitney, and I am reading today the letter of support of Lisa Phillips, the director at the new museum. Dear Chair Carroll, as the Toby Devin Lewis director of the new museum and a graduate of the Whitney Museum of American Arts Independent Study Program, it is my great pleasure to write in support of the Whitney's application to adapt Roy Lichtenstein's former studio in Greenwich Village. These adaptations will ensure that the ISP, a renowned program that plays a critical role in New York City's cultural community, training the next generation of artists, curators, and critics, has a permanent home in New York City. Artists launching their careers face innumerable challenges, and the ISP program is an invaluable resource, generating opportunities to work with leaders in the field and providing space to experiment with new ideas and approaches. Being immersed in a community of their peers is also hugely beneficial to artists. Emerging art critics are exposed to artists' challenges and process in a uniquely intimate way, and artists learn about what motivates curators and critics. This program is a vital part of the cultural community of New York City. It is so important that it have a permanent home, particularly one with a rich history, blocks from the Whitney in the cultural landscape of the Greenwich Village. Johnston Markley's design for the Roy Lichtenstein Studio ensures that this building will remain a vibrant center of artistic creation now and for generations to come. The rooftop addition ensures that the needs of the program participants will be met while also making possible further educational uses. This is a thoughtful, contemporary addition that is in dialogue with the Roy Lichtenstein Studio building and relates to the historic district, its scale, and materiality. It is a harmonious addition that speaks to the serious creative work of the building's past and future. Museums such as the New Museum and the Whitney Museum are deeply committed to supporting the careers of artists, ensuring that they have a place to experiment, be seen, and leave an imprint on New York and the thousands of visitors that visit these institutions. Artists are the conscience of our society, and it is critical for the health and well-being of our city that they continue to have a place to learn, grow, and develop their craft. In that vein, I strongly support this application to create a permanent home for the ISP in the heart of one of New York's great cultural communities. I urge the Commission to vote in favor of this important project. Thank you for your consideration. Lisa Phillips, Toby Devin Lewis, Director of the New Museum.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Michelle Arbalou. Michelle, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC is generally comfortable with this proposal and recognizes it as an important cultural addition to its neighborhood. We are somewhat concerned that it is not set back far enough from the existing front facade, and perhaps that the brick sailor course is not quite different enough from the existing building's brickwork. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Barry Bergdahl, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Are you able to unmute your line?
Yeah, sorry, it just popped up. Sorry, I'll restart. Good morning, everyone. My name is Barry Bergdahl, Professor of Art History at Columbia University. I want to testify here this morning as both an architectural historian and a longtime New Yorker in very enthusiastic support of the Whitney Museum's project for the conversion of the former Lichtenstein Studio, a great gift to the city and to the museum, to create a permanent home for the Whitney's famed independent study program. What a piece of good fortune for New York City and for one of its flagship cultural institutions. Having returned to its historic roots in Greenwich Village with the construction of the Renzo Piano building on the waterfront, the Whitney is at once an anchor and a magnet for the West Village and for the High Line. Much of the development generated by these two attractions is, however, commercial in nature. But now there is before us the prospect for the cultural and educational mission of the Whitney to enhance further the association of Greenwich Village with New York's flowering as the center of the post-World War II art scene with the acquisition of the Lichtenstein studio. Here is a building that speaks of the particularly American and New York phenomenon of the adaptation of former industrial and loft buildings into artist studios, something associated with two of the city's leading historic districts, the Village and Soho. The building at 741 to 45 Washington Street is ready for a new life, and how marvelous that it should be one that continues the artistic legacy of both Lichtenstein and the Whitney in the Village, rather than as a shop or restaurant, which are the prime tenants in so many of the area's buildings. The Whitney Independent Study Program is legendary for the generations of curators, critics, and writers it has produced. Widely celebrated in the worlds of art and of art history, it has been nomadic for many years. Here is the chance to give it an address, and one associated with one of the most renowned artists of the pop art generation. Just as Lichtenstein adapted the structure to serve as a living and art-making space without effacing the industrial character of the inherited building, so now the architects Johnston Mark Lee proposed to again create an artistic dialogue between inherited and new functions. One of the most talented and innovative firms working today, Johnston Mark Lee are no strangers to creating sophisticated new structures in cherished historic districts. Their recent addition of a new building for the Drawing Institute of the Menil Collection in a historic district in Houston is at once one of the finest new art museum buildings of recent years and an exemplar of innovative new design, adding a sensitive new layer to a district that has developed over time. Now they propose to bring that same design sensibility, at once innovative and of our time, and very sensitive to the fabric and the complex industrial artistic heritage of the Far West Village. As an architectural historian, I'm very enthusiastic to think that these talented architects will add to the historical legacy of the neighborhood. Their design is at once as bold as Lichtenstein's art, and yet as respectful as he was, even in their handsome proposed brick addition to the heterogeneous materiality and scales of the village. I would add too, in response to some of the remarks about the inappropriateness that others perceive, which I do not at all, about certain aspects of the design and the setback of this, that this is in addition to an element of a historic district, and I think very much in character with that district. And I think I would not become overly obsessed about the two-story facade below. To me, this is a win-win situation for the Whitney, for the Independent Study Program, and for New York City. It is essentially to invite a structure destined to be historic to join the conversation that other architects and artists have begun in the village as it continues its life of adaptation and renewal. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Laura Busby. And Laura, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Laura Busby. I work in the Whitney Museum Director's Office. I will read a letter of support on behalf of Dr. Martino Steerley. Dear Chair Carroll, I'm writing in my role as the Philip Johnson Chief Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art, where I oversee the wide-ranging program of special exhibitions, installations, and acquisitions of the Department of Architecture and Design. The department has a long history of promoting design excellence in New York City, and it has often expressed its support for the preservation of New York's unique urban fabric and its historic neighborhoods. We firmly believe that historic preservation and intelligent and sensitive contemporary intervention are not at odds, but mutually enhance each other. For this reason, I am delighted to share my support for the Whitney's application to adapt the great American artist Roy Lichtenstein's former studio on Washington Street in Greenwich Village to become the first permanent home of the Whitney's renowned independent study program. The transformation of Lichtenstein's studio will preserve it as a nexus for art making, research, and critical dialogues around art, while giving the space new life as an incubator for future generations of artists, curators, and historians. The respectful adaptations by renowned architectural firm Johnston Mark Lee will make it a wonderful home for the Whitney's independent study program. We are all aware of the pressures facing artists in New York City. This project will make a vibrant addition to the neighborhood's artistic community and ensure the next generation of artists, critics, and scholars continues to have a home in the West Village. The project builds on the long history of artists' adaptive reuse of buildings in Greenwich Village and this building's specific history of change. Lichtenstein acquired it in 1987 and made extensive renovations that allowed him to use it as his New York residence and studio until 1997. I've long followed the work of Johnston Mark Lee, whose work is represented in MoMA's collection. I consider the office one of the most important contemporary architectural practices of our present. Time and again, Johnston Mark Lee have proven their ability to work within pre-existing urban contexts to create a unique dialogue between past and present. I have full trust that their proposed project for the transformation of Lichtenstein Studio will not only create a space of extraordinary architectural quality, but also a meaningful conversation with the existing building and neighborhood. The facade, fenestration changes, and rooftop addition proposed by the architects were carefully crafted in conversation with the historic building and its industrial history. The space was conceived by experts in the design of places for the making and viewing of art to ensure it meets the needs of today's artists. The scale and design of the addition are in keeping with the block and the varied character of Washington Street in the Far West Village. All of the above provide me with the confidence to wholeheartedly support what promises to be a transformative project for the neighborhood and the city. Thank you for your consideration and support of this important project. Sincerely, Dr. Martino Stearley. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we do not have any other signups in advance, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I'll note that we received a letter of support from the Pratt Institute as well. And we received a letter from the Municipal Art Society in which they were largely supportive, though noted concern about the color and patterning of brick on the addition. And Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of the facade restoration, changes in fenestration at the first floor, and additions at the entrance, and recommends denial of the rooftop addition unless its front facade has some setback from the existing parapet. The fenestration is smaller, unevenly distributed, the brick is more similar to the existing, and there is some termination at the top of the addition, and that the appearance is less heavy to the existing building and streetscape. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody for participating in our process today. I'd like to turn back to the applicant team and ask if you would like to respond to some of the comments we've heard. I think the testimony has been largely supportive of this proposal and the notion of a third floor on this building. We did hear some design comments. So I think if you want to address those, that would be wonderful for us.
Sarah, maybe I'll just start and then
Great.
Sharon can touch on some of the design questions. But the Community Board 2 resolution reflects the previous design. And as I noted in the introduction, we have made substantial changes addressing most of those comments, I believe. So I think, it was a very sort of constructive process that we've engaged in. Sharon, do you have more to add on the specifics of the design and the materiality that we might want to respond to?
Well, maybe just a couple just quick comments. First, I think with respect to the materiality, Aaron, you touched on it, but just to highlight that I think, we really see not only the evolution of the building and its historic origins, but the work that Dorothy and Roy did over the years and the kind of variety of brick, as well as kind of looking at the larger urban context. We feel that our study of the brick very much is in keeping with that somewhat kind of, I don't know if collage is the right word, but a sort of assembly of a bit of diverse kinds of brick that hold coherence in their kind of collection of finishes and color. And I think our attention is to be, we use the word harmonious. We think that the brick material, its orientation, draws very much from many clues from the facade, but renders them in a kind of contemporary and precise way. So we do feel we've been very careful in response to the building. And I think with respect to the setback question, I think through both the plan that we showed and in the rendered views from the many different orientations, that we've very carefully studied the sort of functional existing use and the appropriate location for the studio. It's quite a narrow building. It's about 20 feet wide that works within the kind of language of the second story. And so we think holistically, we've placed the building appropriate place and feel that additional setback that we brought of about almost 2 feet overall does just enough to really let that kind of beautiful parapet of the factory facade be the dominant sort of texture and delineation of the historic building. And so I just want to reiterate, the amount of thought that went into testing. We, have so many different studies and feel that we've come to a really appropriate solution that solves for the program and honors the history of the building.
Great, thank you. Okay, we do have a question. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thanks. Normally, when one sees, historic buildings or even contemporary buildings, they tend to ascend in weight from the heaviest and densest to the lightest. Your addition is definitely more dense and less open than the stories below it. I'm sure that was purposeful. Explain what your thinking was behind that, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think as we noted in the diagrams, which indicate the sort of way we've organized the use of the building, that the addition on the 3rd floor is for an artist studio. And we, in the conversations with Adam and the team, we thought so much about the contemporary artist practice. And it's not necessarily, just a painter in her studio with daylight flooding in. It's a very multifunctional, multidimensional practice. And so the intention was, one, to respond to the new use as a contemporary artist studio. So we balance the amount of enclosure, wall space, and volume with the intention from the exterior, of course, to bring in daylight and be respectful of the order of the building, which we think we have. But it's more of a kind of harmony. It's a dynamic equilibrium of the scale of the industrial use with the language of the building, which includes a sort of smaller scale in the middle, this or almost residential or office scale. So we think we're creating a kind of a balance. We're not following kind of maybe more traditional ideas of a residential building or an attic space. So we're trying to find that balance.
And I would just add, Commissioner, thank you for your question. And is that the interior height of the studio itself is the bare minimum of what we imagine we could use, which is 11 feet. And by right, we could have gone up tremendously higher, but we wanted to be respectful to the street. And again, as Sharon said, to create a very useful volume for artists. If you look at the old studios in Greenwich Village, they were mostly inhabited by painters, which is why the glass clear stories are typically what you find. But these days you have many artists who are working not only as painters, but as sculptors, multimedia artists, video artists, etc. So we were trying to balance wall space with overall light and appropriateness in relationship to the street. Thank you very much.
And so basically it sounds like what you're saying is that, at least as I hear it, is that it's a functional balance between the program, which dictates more solid, and the aesthetics and the tying of the building together, which indicates having some kind of windows. Is that a fair way to say it?
Exactly, because in fact, the previous present design actually had only 2 windows because we wanted the wall space. Understanding, the community's concerns and everything, we added that space, which was a little less ideal for artists, but we felt absolutely a compromise that was totally appropriate to make. So it is exactly, as you said, a balance.
And at the same time, another detail that I noticed that I was curious about was the very, very high horizon line of those 3 windows, where it's even like you're eating into the roof line of the interior. What was your idea behind why you made that space above the window and to the parapet so narrow?
Yeah, thank you for noticing that, an astute observation. I think our intention there was really in response to finding this balance between reading this as a kind of horizontal mass as an addition and the verticality of these windows. So by pushing that just a little bit higher than you might expect, we feel that it has that kind of equilibrium again between the verticality of the window orientation and the overall horizontality of the mass. So we think it makes it feel lighter. I think to Adam's point about adding that middle window, that as well, along with the proportion of that window, it just pushing a little bit more than what you might expect as the obvious approach, is part of that kind of balance and bringing a sort of lightness to the overall horizontal massing reading.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Yes, thank you. Just wondering if you had considered other cladding materials for the addition other than brick. Did you study that at all?
I think we fell in this approach that given, the kind of holistic use of the building, we're bringing something new, but we're very much advancing the historic practice of it as an artist studio through the Lichtensteins. We felt that the use of brick was appropriate. I think also following the legacy of brick additions on the property. And so that seemed like the right approach to us, that in this approach of harmony, and that it was more through the detailing, the orientation of the brick, picking up on the approach to the window lintel as a vertical orientation and bringing that to the facade, the sort of subtle striping on the north elevation that we're weaving together, but we're also clearly differentiating in many ways from the detailing to the window proportion.
I think also from the outset, there was an intent for this to be a quiet addition, for it to be representative of the sort of contemplative work that's happening within, and that it not have something that draws attention to itself, and that it sort of fits comfortably within that brick context. Everything in the context is brick, whether it's the expressed primary facades of the buildings or the exposed secondary facades that you get through the experience of Greenwich Village, where you have breaks in the street wall and you're able to see those juxtapositions of utility and practicality of the side elevations and the primary elevation. So I think that from an intent perspective, the brick addition was really a fundamental part of what the Whitney and the design team was really contemplating here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so not seeing any other final questions, commissioners, I'm going to send you all requests to unmute.
Can I just get, if I could, Sarah Carol,
Yes,
just for 1
please.
second, is just say, first of all, again, thank you for hearing this. And I want to thank all the commissioners for their thoughtfulness in this. But I just want to say, as a lifelong New Yorker and somebody who has very much adopted Greenwich Village and as my home, I am so grateful for the back and forth and the generosity of the conversation between the community board, village preservation, municipal art society, Westbeth. It actually, in a day of polarization, represents the very best of generosity, listening, critique, responsiveness, and finding a joint solution. And it has been such a joy to enter into this process. And I know that's not always the case when it comes to these things, haven't participated in the past, but to me, this is really represents the very best of what can happen in New York. So thank you for this opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that experience. I think that says a lot about what the great results that can come out of this process. Okay, so commissioners, let's make a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. We've had a very thoughtful presentation. We have in the presentation heard about the development history of this western end of the village that resulted in a diversity of building typologies, scales, and sizes. We've also heard about the history of the artists and the artists' use of buildings in the village, and that continues today. And we've heard about the sort of development patterns of the industrial buildings in the West Village that evolved over time as they were being adapted for new uses, including by artists, and including this particular building, which was also expanded over time with additions. And so in that spirit, the proposal is to expand the building to allow for this continued artist type use in this industrial building by expanding the third floor and modifying the windows at the ground floor in a way that has been sort of picks up on the earlier renovations. And so I think this is a really well thought out presentation and proposal. I think there have been some questions about materiality and design details, so I think we'll probably hear some of that in our discussion. So why don't we go ahead? So Commissioner or Vice Chair Bland, would you like to start this one?
I would. Thank you. I have to say my cup runneth over. Projects like this, proposals like this, make me so happy that 14 years ago when the mayor asked me to serve on this commission that I said yes. This is exactly, adding new to old is, I think, one of the great challenges of architecture today, and at its heart, one of the most difficult things to pull off as well. Often more difficult, I think, than a new building. I want to say that I think that having Adam and Dorothy join this conversation, not with a few words, but with really profound statements, really helped me understand the nature of what this all is so much better. And so I thank them for their very articulate time spent talking to us. And as I've said before, I could listen to Aaron all day talk about buildings in historic districts. So I always thank Aaron for her very articulate ways of describing things. I also, as a native Houstonian, know the skills of this architecture team. I know well the Menil Collection addition that they've made recently, visited it several times, and applaud their work, and really I'm so pleased that they have been chosen for this project. Now, as Barry Bergdahl, I think, said for me too, I don't oppose any aspect of this, not even any aspect of it. I think it's remarkably fresh and spot on as a way to add new to old in this extraordinary context. I also want to say that just the facade study, before Sharon showed the diagrammatic red lines, I was already in my mind putting those red lines onto the facade because that's the way my mind works as a designer. And I was pleased to say that my red lines mentally and her red lines actually coincided. I think this is a very rare, unexpected, it doesn't follow all the rules, and that's what makes it so fresh. I think the analysis of the facade alone, and there's so many other things to discuss here, which I will not weigh in on. I'm sure other commissioners following me will. But I want to just say that that organization of the fenestration, solid to void, reminds me a bit of how Corbusier might have analyzed a building. And I'll even go further and say Palladio as well. So I'm really in favor of all of this. The material is right, the proportions are right and unexpected. I think this is a brilliant little addition to our city, and I'm really pleased to have heard it today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Lutfi, you joined a little bit late. I'm not sure if you saw enough and feel comfortable yet to comment.
I actually don't. I am very excited about the concept of this project, but I missed the presentation for the most part. So I think I'm going to have to sit this one out.
Okay, all right. Commissioner Jefferson?
In terms of urban design, I have a criteria that I usually go with. And the criteria is visibility and cohesion of the block. And and that's a criteria for decision making. If indeed this is not part of that, this is something added or something bigger than that, than the cohesion of the block, it becomes another element of a public element, then indeed I can accept the addition. And I'm leaning towards accepting it because it becomes something different. It adds something unique to this block and to the cohesion of the block. So I can accept that. So the initial criteria is voided, and this new criteria, this becomes something else. Using that criteria, this is a well-done project. They're well conceived, well done, and even the stripes in the back is acceptable because it's a new thing. It's something different, and I'm accepting it as something, another monument in this place.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
I'll start by commenting on what will be the trivial part of this, which is the changes on the first floor, which are perfectly acceptable. I think they increase the symmetry of the base, and that's fine. I will also follow up on Commissioner Bland's comment that page 22, which shows the red lines, I think really was very convincing in terms of the layout of the fenestration and the rooftop, and it really emphasized how it could be the new addition supports the symmetry of the structure below. We often talk about these kinds of situations in terms of whether they're far enough away from the materiality of the original structure, or close enough to the materiality of the original structure. In other words, if it's going to be different, it ought to be different. And I will say I did struggle a little bit with that. But in the end, I think I came out with Commissioner Bland and Commissioner Jefferson. I think it does for what it is, a third foot, and I'll call it a third floor of the building. I won't call it a rooftop addition. I think it's sufficiently distinctive and perhaps radically distinctive. So I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Thanks. I'm in agreement with so much of what's been said. Firstly, I think that this very visible third floor and addition to the building is entirely appropriate on this block, on this building, in this district. I think it could have gone in any number of directions in terms of material selection. It could have been more glazed. It could have been sort of something more like a roof, a standing seam, some other kind of material. It could have also had a more sort of completely different roof-like form. And I might have felt that that would be appropriate as well as a distinct addition and in continuation of the legacy of artist studios in this area, to studio additions to residences, to townhomes, as well as to commercial industrial buildings. So I think it could have gone many ways. It's interesting to me that the final decision was to use this very kind of symmetrical, restrained window system, and the brick, the specific selection of the brick, which is actually very beautiful. In that, I think this isn't just a studio addition or an artist studio, it is moving towards an institutional. I mean, it is institutional. It belongs to, it's part of the Whitney. And I think that to call some kind of, to make that evident in some way was sort of the natural inclination of the architects, kind of in terms of who the client is and what the program is. So while we don't typically talk about program or use, I think that there is an interesting kind of transition here from the artist studio, the rooftop addition, to its institutionalization. And I think that that sort of makes sense and sits comfortably here and is also appropriate. So all in all, I support the project.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Holford-Smith?
Yes, I agree with so much of what has already been said about the building. I think it's a great success. And reason I asked about the materiality of the addition was to really understand the thinking behind the thought process of the design of the, I guess we should call it a third floor, not an addition. And I think that using the brick in this orientation and very sort of taut, modern detailing really strikes a really good balance between sort of depicting an artist's studio and this sort of more commonplace, everyday sort of industrial building below. And I think the use of brick is really, really appropriate. Normally, I would want to see the original volume, the volume of the original building expressed by setting back, perhaps from the parapet on the side. But I think that the idea that they're introduced here of knitting this sort of stucco side finish of the existing building, which was a parge coat, where you actually can see the outline of the old building that used to be there, bringing that up, weaving it with the new brick is really, I think, a more inventive way of showing the sort of the intermingling of the old and the new. It reminds me of turn of the century large buildings with the side elevations had sort of more decorative brick detailing. So they weren't just blank facades. But I think all in all, this is a very successful project. And I find it very appropriate.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree with what everyone was saying. I think that this is generally an appropriate scheme, and I'm very interested to see it realized. I think that the brick detailing, the patterning of the brick, the way it's laid up, will be a very sensual detail if it is done as they've shown it. It's a very curious application because it goes against so many of the norms that we see. It's weighty where we would expect something to be light. It's vertical where we would expect it to be horizontal. It's formal on a building that's rather informal. It uses a kind of almost Art Deco kind of detailing around the windows, which is not what's shown on the building below. The many aspects of it are very unusual, and I'm sure that's very intentional. That I know the work of the architects, and it is really fascinating, wonderful, excellent work. And New York is lucky to have a building by them or a project by them here. I wonder how we would have reacted if this was a single family house addition. I wonder if our view of this and its appropriateness would have changed in that circumstance. But I think as it is, I think it's appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, just to echo all the sentiments, I think this is appropriate. It's actually, this is a historic moment for us on the landmark. I think this is a major gift, and I think the context and as Vice Chair Glenn alluded to, the symmetry, the Palladio kind of treatment, and there's a rationale and order and logic to it. So I commend the team and commend the applicant for putting together a very interesting proposal. And this is a great day for New York City.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. So I think we have a consensus to support. So Commissioner Chapin, I'm so sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you missed me in the round.
Sorry.
I just want to also express my opinion that this is I think an excellent proposal in all respects, and I agree with Commissioner Bland and also with particularly with Ann Holford Smith's remarks about the difference in some of the additions we see we ask for a lot of, pulling back and other things. In this case, I think the addition is very well differentiated, but also related. And with the history of rooftop additions, I think this is very approvable. And I want to just commend the architects. I think they showed great sensitivity in developing this entire proposal. So I can support it as presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so I said we have a consensus of support, so I will go ahead and make the motion here. In the matter of docket number 23-00030, 741 Washington Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District, a two-story commercial building built in 1912 to 13. This is an application to construct a rooftop addition and alter masonry openings. And I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Greenwich Village Historic District, and that the building has evolved from a commercial building with a garage on the first floor in the first half of the 20th century to the home and studio of the artist Roy Lichtenstein, beginning in 1986, and that after his death, the building was bequeathed to the Whitney Museum of American Art for use as a new home for its independent study program. I recommend approval, finding that the work will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features of the building, that this two-story commercial building is of a typology that is not defined by its street wall height, and that it has been modified throughout its history, including significant changes to the roof and setback terraces, and therefore the construction of a visible addition close to the street wall is in keeping with the evolution of this building over time, that the streetscape features buildings of varying heights, many taller than 3 stories, such that the proposed 1-story addition on this building will not overwhelm or detract from the existing streetscape, that the addition will be set back from the primary facade, and that the historic decorative parapet will be maintained, and its simple volumetric form will retain a sense of the original scale and character of the building below, that the treatment on the side wall, including the alternating vertical stripes of stucco and brick, will also help to weave the new addition in with the historic building and retain a sense of the original form, and that the materials and details of the addition, featuring the brick cladding, vertical coursing, and large multi-light steel window assemblies and sidewalls comprised of alternating brick and stucco, are all in keeping with the utilitarian design and materials of the existing building, that the symmetrical punched openings at the primary facade of the addition are in keeping with the fenestration pattern at the lower floors of the building and are consistent with the top floor window openings found at similar buildings within this historic district, that raising the sill at the southernmost Washington Street facade historic entrance bay and installing brick infill beneath the masonry opening at the north and south bays will return symmetry to the facade, that converting the south bay from a door to a window is in keeping with the changing programmatic use of this building over time, that the proposed tripartite window assembly at the first floor will match the historic windows at the facade in terms of materials, details, operation, and finish, and that the proposed work will support the building's adaptive reuse as an educational facility for the nearby Whitney Museum of American Art and will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Greenwich Village Historic District. And Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
I'm abstaining.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
9 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention. The motion passes.
So that's approved. Thank you very much and good luck. We look forward to
Right.
seeing it.
Thank you all to the commissioners. I'm truly touched and honored by your words. And I just want a special thank you to Sarah Carroll and her entire staff who were incredibly helpful and giving us feedback in the process. Sarah, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, we'll now move to public hearing item number 2, LPC 23-00186, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 41, Lot 7504, 70 Pine Street, the city's service building and first floor interior, individual and interior landmark. This is an Art Deco style office building with an Art Deco style interior lobby, designed by Clinton and Russell, Holton and George, and built in 1931 to 32. And the application is to install furniture structures in the designated interior lobby spaces.
Commissioners, the applicants have joined the hearing. You now have control of these slides. Do remember to introduce yourself and you may begin.
Thank you, Commissioners. Cass Stackelberg, Higgins, Quays, Barth and Partners. That is indeed a tough act to follow. I'm joined by Nathan Bruckner, our client at DTH Capital, who will be doing the presentation with me. Edith, oh, there we go. Very good. Terrific. So as Corey mentioned, the proposal is to work at the lobby of 70 Pine Street. This is historically known as the City Services Building. It's an extraordinary 66-story skyscraper in Lower Manhattan, and it's located on a site bound by Pearl Street, Cedar Street, Pine Street, Cedar Street, and Pearl Street, a sloping site from the west to the east. The building was designed by Clinton and Russell, and the exterior and the interior lobby was designated in 2011. The proposal is for the installation of freestanding fixtures in a portion of the lobby for a new public cafe. First, starting looking at the historic plan to orient you, Pine Street is across the bottom of the plan, Cedar above, and Pearl Street here. Because of the slope of the site, the primary entry at grade is on the west side of the site. You can see historically revolving doors on the south and north sides. And then you can see the way the first floor was organized with this large group of elevators, 24 elevators at the core of the building. And the building, as planned, was intended to accommodate 7,000 to 8,000 people working on the upper floors, a tremendous population. And you can imagine the sort of level of activity and energy that happened through the lobby during the course of the day. And in support of that, to point out, and particularly relevant to our proposal, are these spaces here, here, and here. These are separate commercial spaces that were designed, as you'll see momentarily, with storefronts that faced into the lobby. There were no entries from the street. They were only accessible from the lobby. This Pine Street Hall, the West Hall, the Cedar Street Hall, and the East Hall, with the central elevator corridors in the middle. And so the activity and the level of energy through the passage of these thousands of people, as well as the presence of these storefronts, certainly spoke to a very active place. The lobby and the building has been recently reclaimed and reinvigorated. 5 years ago, the building was converted to residential use with hotel, commercial, and food and beverages, beverage uses as well. So the building is once again a very active place. The existing plan, as it is today, in green, you can see the outline of the designated space. The area of work is just in this southern corridor here, but you can see there's a coffee shop, a small restaurant here, an empty storefront here that will help service the cafe, and then a restaurant in this location. So there is, once again, sort of front-facing, lobby-facing activity in the ground floor. Some existing photographs, both to give you a sense of the materiality and the range of materials. The floor is this checkerboard pattern of marble, these remarkable deco detailing across the wall, the sort of faceted two-tone marble, excuse me, cast aluminum storefronts, and this beautiful faceted plaster ceiling, a stair that runs up along the south side to the second floor, adjacent to the area of work. And you can also begin to see the sort of uses in the lobby, people passing it through with strollers, walking their dogs, coming and going, people sitting on benches drinking a cup of coffee. So it's becoming an active place once again, and the proposal really is meant to enhance that energy. Turning to the proposal, this is an existing view in the area of work looking east in that, west in that south quarter, and then the proposal, which really involves installing loose furniture, tables and chairs, as well as these freestanding banquettes, which have no physical attachments to the underlying historic fabric. All the systems are fed through existing penetrations in the walls, and all of this has been designed in a reversible fashion. We thought it was also relevant to just look at the way these ground floor lobbies were treated historically. And there were sort of two types for buildings of this age. This is the Manhattan Company building at 40 Wall Street, completed in 1930, so contemporary with 70 Pine Street. And these two types really involve the banking buildings and the commercial buildings. And this would be one of the banking building types, where large space was set aside for a banking hall, and the elevator lobbies and main lobby were sort of set off to one side to allow for as much space for the banking space. And you can see this clearly at 40 Wall Street located here, the entry into the elevator lobby, and then most of the ground floor and the upper floor dedicated to the banking hall space. Similar to 70 Pine Street would be the American Telephone and Telegraph building, which was completed in 1928, again, with a central elevator core, and then around the perimeter, a lot of activity and energy, building entry here, but there was a jeweler historically built right into the lobby with 10-foot high partitions, and other counters and sort of transactional spaces tied to the business of the telephone company. Telephone booths, of course, lining the walls as well. So there was a lot of activity you can see represented in this photo on the lower right. And this is more similar to what the way 70 Pine Street operated and sort of the energy that we're looking to tap into. We also thought it was helpful to look at the way the Commission has regulated some of these interior lobby spaces. This is the lobby of the American Telephone and Telegraph building at 195 Broadway, renderings of the Nobu restaurant that is now open, where the Commission found it appropriate for obviously loose furniture, but bar fixtures, tall partitions and banquettes along perimeter walls, suspended artwork, all intended to sort of reinvigorate a space that was quite dormant at the time of designation. The Edwardian Room at the Plaza Hotel, where commercial and retail uses through these large fixtures have been installed to reactivate the space. And then more recently, the Emigrant Savings Bank, where the Commission approved a large art exhibition space in the banking hall that's to open next month, I believe. But in the ancillary spaces, furniture, tall fixtures, things like that along the perimeter walls to help sort of support the new use within the lobby. So the Commission has acknowledged that the installations, similar to what we're proposing here in support of these new uses, can be found to be appropriate given limited visual and physical effects or impacts. And then finally, returning back to the existing plan, just to highlight the area of work where this installation of the cafe will be in the southern corridor. Nathan Reed.
Hi, hi, I'm Reed, the designer for DTH, the ownership group of the building. And I'm here to present the design and give you a bit more info on the details. So this is a floor plan of the four structures as well as the freestanding furniture that we've included to add a nice intimate setting to the lobby and delineate this space, which is otherwise kind of confusing for guests in the lobby to figure out because of the several entrances and different commercial tenants down there. And so this space is meant to allow either guests of Black Fox Coffee to come bring their coffee or a meal from Blue Park Kitchen, or just any member from the public or the building to come and work on their laptops, to have a business meeting, to bring friends and enjoy the amazing lobby that this historic landmark is. And this would allow us to revitalize the space and bring life back to something that otherwise, though Cass mentioned, like there is activity around Black Fox in the entrance and residences going up to the residential lobby, this space is very underutilized today. And this will allow us to bring much more life back into the space, and we're very excited about it. Next slide. So here's an elevation view of the structures, the freestanding structures. And the above slide is pointing out the ventilation where we have electrical access. And that's what we'll be utilizing. It's without needing to penetrate into the building whatsoever. These structures very efficiently utilize these few access points that we have in the lobby to bring more lighting and other functions to the space, charging ports for people to come use their laptops with. And below is the structures. It gives you a sense of the scale of the structures in relationship to the rest of the space. The height of the structures being about 9 feet and the ceilings being 15.5 feet tall. So it's roughly half of the overall space that it's taking up. Next slide, please. And here we have a side-by-side view of the existing lobby with the proposed structure. As you can see, it creates that delineation while still keeping a view to the end of the hall. This space is very narrow, and so it's important for us to have these views that extend throughout the lobby while still creating this intimate setting that we've been discussing. And here's, if you just walk in a bit further, like more towards the center, this gives you a good view of most of the structures in the space and gives you a sense of the seating that we've been able to create. And it also gives you a sense of the kind of attention to the materials in the lobby that we wanted to incorporate into the material palette of our structures. We wanted them to both blend in to the same colors that exist throughout the lobby, and also incorporate architectural details of the Art Deco style within the building, particularly the faceted geometric nature of a lot of the detailing extends itself into the columns. And we've also chosen a lot of materials that exist from early 20th century design. And here is a view from the opposite end of the lobby. And as you can see, this is another entrance into the lobby on the left. And we have a mirroring of the design on this side of the space. If you're familiar with Crown Shy, the restaurant that operates in the lobby, it would be directly to your back behind you on this view. And now we're going to cycle back through the space. This is a photo of the staircase, and this shows you the non-historic vent paneling that has the electrical access that we'll be utilizing. So, and here it just gives you a better sense of the scale, more of an elevation style view of the structures. As well as here's the center column, as well as the center nook behind. Next slide, please. And here's the east wing structure. And this is our material palette that, again, is inspired by the early 20th century design. A lot of materials that were used in interiors back then. Cork was very popular, as well as black lacquer and mahogany stained wood. as well as chrome exists throughout the space, and as well as the burgundy vinyl. It all kind of stems from specific colors that we found within the stone detailing in the lobby. And here's another material that was not mentioned before. It's this proposed open woven rattan-like material that we're using for the backing, which will have us, another big design detail of these structures is that they're acoustic dampening, and a big priority for us is to mitigate a lot of the sound that will be created in this social area. And so this woven material will allow sound to travel through into an acoustic dampener that we'll have within the panels as well. And here's some technical drawings of the structures, just to give you a sense of how they're built and how they're assembled on site, but also disassemblable, allowing for reversibility. And as you can see, they're made of several parts that are manufactured off-site and will be assembled on-site and allow for disassemblability on multiple occasions, like being able to switch out different parts and pieces as we need. Here's more technical views. I'm going to zoom by this a bit more just to save some time. But if we need to return to any specific details at the end, we can in the Q&A. And here's the two ends of the space of the proposal. Just in summary, these are freestanding structures. We paid a lot of attention to designing something that could be freestanding, but also delineate an intimate setting within the lobby to be programmed for both the commercial tenants that exist, but also the future cocktail bar that will be surfacing the area at night, as well as creating a public space that's nice to come hang out in or work in or have meetings in, etc. And this will allow us to bring life back into this lobby, which was bustling back in the heyday of when it was built, which it no longer feels like that's the case there. And so we want to bring people and energy back into this space, and we think that this project does a great job of doing that.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify in this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. We do have some speakers signed up in advance. And our first speaker will be Lucien Reynolds from Community Board 1. I'll be promoting you to panelists now. And if you can please unmute your mic and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Commissioners, thank you so much for your time today. My name is Lucien Reynolds. I'm the District Manager of Manhattan Community Board 1. I'm speaking today in place of Alice Blank, the Vice Chair of CB1, who was called away on board business. I'll just be very, very brief and read the only therefore be it resolved statement of the resolution that was sent to you all regarding 70 Pine Street. It reads, CB1 recommends the Landmarks Preservation Commission reject the modifications to the 70 Pine Street lobby because the location and height of the proposed kiosk-like structures disrupt the line of sight to too many of the historically significant features of the original interior landmark lobby. Thank you so much. That's the entirety of our therefore statement. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Christina Conroy. And Christina, I'll be promoting you to panelists now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, 70 Pine Street is, judging by the date of construction, outside the focus of the VSNY. However, because of the importance of this building as both an individual and interior landmark, we feel we must comment. Two questions must always be answered before permitting for alterations to an interior landmark that can be issued. One, are the proposed changes reversible? And two, will the proposed work significantly alter the user's perception of the space? The applicant fails to address the first question at all. The designation report for this interior lists the floor as a significant feature. The applicant is proposing to install 3 freestanding banquettes atop these floors, but there is absolutely no information on the way they will be anchored to this protected floor or the way electrical power will be provided for the illuminated panels shown in the renderings. Now, Commissioners, in the 1990s, owners of the Vouliard houses wished to install a freestanding bar requiring water and electrical connections in the center of the Gold Room, another designated interior. Now, that applicant provided drawings showing that they could provide both utilities by removing one 6x6 parquet tile from the protected floor. That tile was stored for possible reinstallation. These applicants must provide a similar detailed proposal before it can be approved. The proposal also fails to address the user's perception of the space. Commissioners, 2 of the banquette structures are 9 feet tall and 20 feet long. The third is lesser in length, but over 10 feet tall. They will completely conceal the designated staircases and much of the wall cladding. Now, at the Four Seasons, the banquettes were less than 5 feet tall, allowing both an intimate experience and perfect views of those beautiful rooms. This proposal must be modified to allow the designation features to be seen. The height of these proposed structures should be reduced by half. And finally, we question the applicant's decision to match the colors of the historic materials. Difficult to do successfully in any event because of the difference in age between new and old. Using a different color palette will allow users to discern which materials are new, which are historic, and increase their appreciation of both. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Michelle Arbalou. Michelle, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this proposal to be inappropriate. We think this intervention should be less cluttered, with the banquette screens and central bar area illuminated or scaled down so they do not cover the distinctive historic features of the space. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Megan Weatherby. Megan, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Dear Landmarks Preservation Commission, I'm Megan Weatherby, the Executive Director of the Art Deco Society of New York. ADSNY is thrilled that the public will have an open invitation to what LPC described as, quote, one of the most impressive office building lobbies in New York City, end quote, after being hidden from view for decades. While we generally support this application, we are concerned that a bit too much of the landmark interior becomes hidden again, but this time by the proposed furniture. We appreciate the effort to design a room within a room and a contextual vocabulary, but we ask the landmark features to please speak for themselves, rather than be in competition with new design. The LPC designation report describes this space as being one of, quote, relatively few buildings from this era that can boast such a large, ornate, and well-preserved public interior, end quote. However, this lobby's grandeur and expansiveness feel cramped by the introduction of partitions and their substantial height. We ask the LPC to look carefully at the concealment of the opulent stair, the center nook, and the original element that's currently being used as a planter in your elevation. There is not yet a balance between making this space usable while showcasing its best asset, itself. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we do not have any additional speakers signed up. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I will turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Great, thank you very much, Sonia. All right, I'd like to turn back to the applicant and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to make just a few comments. And Edith, am I able to move the slides? I'd love to go to the,
Yes,
the proposed
you have
plan.
control of the site. You have to click on the screen and you can move them around. You can go backwards. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Let me just run back to slide 50. I just, I think the first point, which I don't need a slide to make, I think you hopefully all heard in my presentation and Reed's presentation that there are absolutely no penetrations required as part of this installation. So in terms of reversibility, I think we made it clear that the fixtures themselves are not anchored to the stone, and all the electric and any of the mechanical systems are all being fed through non-historic vent covers that are directly behind or adjacent to the individual areas that are being where there's installation. And I think the other thing to remember is really the size and scale of this lobby. Oops. You can see, there are multiple corridors, east-west, north-south, different axes. The proposed work is really just in one area of the lobby. So in terms of impacting the experience of the space, visitors are coming into the lobby through these revolving doors. Most of the axes are completely, without partition. There are some glass partitions that were installed under commission approval about 5 years ago, but the team has worked hard to two things, to pull these two elements back so that there are still long views along this east-west corridor, and that this element, which is a small marble sort of kiosk, a sort of information booth, is part of the installation at the center of this corridor. And then this element, this would be the only fixture that blocks views north, and that's leading to this space, which is a mailroom. So we think that the proposal does in fact preserve the important views within the lobby. It doesn't conceal significant features that are not seen elsewhere. Even the stairs you can see above and on either side of these elements here and here. So we think that there's been a balance struck between retaining the perception of the space and integrating these fixtures into the hall. And Reed, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to speak to regarding material palette or finish and compatibility or anything else, but let me know.
No, I mean, the design inspiration of we thought that we struck a nice balance between both being inspired by Art Deco elements, but also adding enough contemporary elements by paring down those elements into something that was a bit more minimal was good. And I think inspires guests to also appreciate the lobby. And then as well as the stair railing, you're still free to walk around these structures and appreciate the stair railing from behind the structures. We feel like though we're blocking some of the stone work on that staircase, it was one of the more simple detailing that repeats throughout the space enough that you can experience it elsewhere, and everything else is still pretty much appreciated, as well as the kiosk in the center that we're building that column within. We also made it important that on the south-facing side, that the gate to that kiosk was remained open for appreciating, and a lot of that detailing of the planter is still visible as well.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, I'm sending you all requests to unmute so that we can then move to our discussion. All right, and Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And so we have some freestanding furniture that is not mechanically fastened to the interior finishes. in this one section of the lobby that, and this furniture has sort of enclosures or walls to create a space within the space, with finishes that relate to some of the finishes in the interior space. So let's begin our discussion. Commissioner Jefferson, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I was struck by the idea that the examples that were shown, examples of interiors, landmark interiors that were shown, there were rooms and there were elements placed in them, things, there were furniture, but elements were placed in a space. In this particular case, you're making rooms. You're designing a room with benches and seats in it. And that's a totally different thing from the examples. And I find them, the scale of the rooms, 9 feet and total ceiling height is 18 feet, it's half. And so it does obscure this beautiful stair. The handrail is gorgeous, the stair is beautiful. I agree with one of the comments that perhaps if it was 5 feet, I could accept that as a proportion. So I think the making of the rooms and the scale of them is too much for me. I would suggest that you do it in scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Gustafson?
I think Commissioner Jefferson nailed it. It's this concept of putting a room in a room. The use of the Nobu space as an example, I think did not help their presentation because it is so conformed to the space and revealing of the space, as opposed to looking like something that's sort of dropped into to block the views of the space. So I don't even know whether 5 feet would work, but this definitely does not.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran?
Thanks. I do think that the view that we have up here, the top image where we do see that kind of symmetrical stair flowing down, is such an important view, even though you can't actually occupy that exact spot and see all of that probably ever. But I think it's very important, and that the proposal in the locations where the stairs themselves are hidden or slightly obscured is where I find there is a problem. I think it's appropriate to expand to the kind of the footprint of the center element, what is currently that information kiosk. If it were to grow or become more of a lozenge or have sort of spokes around it that might be used, because it is sort of free floating. But I think that the elements, the bar elements at the stair sides, even though they don't penetrate the material, because they obscure it so significantly, and because these are opaque partitions, I mean, one could have imagined maybe they would be glazed or something, or some other kind of material where we could see even like the sort of the outline of the stair behind. That would have been interesting as well. So I'm not in favor of the two elements at the stairs, but am supportive and could see a further expansion of the center element as well as the one at the door attaching to the residential tower.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I agree largely with the comments of my fellow commissioners so far. I can approve the concept of a movable restaurant furniture here, which I think is fine as a use. And I think, but these partitions are too tall and not, they really, I think they should be largely transparent, in which case you could see what's going on and it would not interfere with the, with the perception of the space. And the applicant talked about needing soundproofing, but that could be achieved with a transparent partition as well. So I think they should be lower and much more transparent, and that would achieve their ends and still allow the space to be viewed.
Great, thank you.
And
Commissioner
the lighting's okay.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. I agree with much of what has been said. The appropriateness of the furniture per se is for me acceptable. However, the scale is completely inappropriate. I'll try to be as clear as I can about what I think are the lines across which this should not cross. Number one, no railing should be obscured. None. What that means practically is that the partitions come down to about, to fit under the railings, and that the end bench closest to to where the railings terminate should either become a flat bench with no back or something else that reveals the railings. The railings should not be obscured. One. Two, for me, the center niche, which blocks the view north to the center of the space, is inappropriate because it's blocking that view. Granted, it's not necessarily the most glorious view, but it lends to a sense of space and connectedness that the other changes that have been approved in this lobby have diminished, right? So having a sense of the continuity of the space, even though there are multiple uses that prevent access to all of that space, I think is a very important aspect of earlier approvals and of the landmarks designation of the space as a whole as being a landmark. Therefore, the entire back of that unit should come down, in my opinion, to the top of the back, and the niche should extend to the glass such that the space is reinforced and not made shallower. I think that the center kiosk can be taller as it's shown, but I think the use of this kind of flaring light fixture cornice is very much too much attracting attention to itself and away from the lobby. And that in general, the design should be much more deferent, much more modest. This space has so much going on and is so dynamic and vivacious that the proposed additions should be much more deferential and quiet and submissive to that organization, not competitive with it.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I agree with most of the comment. I think the commission is making the right suggestion. I think we're in agreement that the furniture approach, as Commissioner Jefferson said correctly, is much more acceptable than the partition. I think the scale, the proportion, and the arrangement and the location, I think it's clear from the comments and the testimony that this should be restudied and the application refined it.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi.
I think all of the commissioners and also the other comments we've received have been right on. And I do want to say I appreciate the fact that the applicant has tried to do this in a way to make sure that it's reversible and to tap into, existing electric. And they've also been thinking about ways to mitigate and dampen the sound, which is very important in a space that has high ceilings and also also materials that are just, that sound will bounce off of. But I agree with my fellow commissioners that number one, there are different ways to mitigate sound. And I do think that by using the using installing those walls behind the seating areas, it helps to obscure the wonderful details of the stairwell and also the other architecture. And so something else has to be explored. And I completely agree about the comments concerning the kiosks. And I think that not only is the cornice too busy, but I feel like the whole top of that kiosk has to come off, and maybe it doesn't need the walls per se either. I do feel like, as Commissioner Gustafson said, the Nobu example is sort of a beautiful example of how you can utilize a space and accent it and add to it in a wonderful way, without masking it or competing with it. And in a way, in that particular example, I think it works incredibly well. Also with, I think it was, what page was that? It was just 2 pages further, very understated. I think it was 51 Chambers Street, also worked very, very well. So I think, so the applicant needs to do some rethinking. I think this is a good start, but they have to think more about the environment. I don't have a problem with the fact that they tapped into the palette of the space, but I wouldn't have had a problem if they had picked other colors as well.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. And I will also note that Commissioner Bland is recused on this item and has not been present for any of the presentation or discussion. So I think that we have a consensus here that while appreciating the need for activating the space and some of the other things that go along with that, like the sound attenuation, that in this case, and appreciate the reversibility in this approach, but that the walls and the detailing on some of the walls needs to be restudied to ensure that it doesn't obscure architectural features, view corridors, and doesn't compete with the interior detailing and finishes. So we will take no action, and we'll have you back as soon as you're ready to come back. And we'll now move to the next item.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is public hearing item number 3, LPC 23-00178, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 192, Lot 1, 32 Avenue of the Americas, the long distance building of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, individual and interior landmark. This is an Art Deco style skyscraper with an Art Deco style interior lobby designed by Mackenzie, Voorhees and Mellon, built in 1911 to 14 and enlarged in 1914 to 16, and again in 1930 to 32 by Voorhees, Mellon, and Walker. The application is to alter entrance infill, install exterior lighting, and install floor-mounted lighting within the designated interior lobby.
And commissioners, the applicants have joined the hearing. You now have control of the presentation. Just click on the screen to advance and state your name for the record, and you may begin.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Julie Rosen from Higgins, Quays, Barth and Partners, and I'm joined today by Robert Finger of Fogarty Finger Architecture, who will take you through the design portion of the presentation in just a bit. Robert, if you could go to the next slide, please. 32 Avenue of the Americas is located in Tribeca, just south of Canal Street, and it's a large multi-tenant office building covering an entire block, bounded by 6th Avenue to the west and Church Street to the east. And the primary flow of pedestrian traffic runs along this east-west axis, beginning at entrances on either of those street facades and running along the through-block lobby. And the proposal before you today is envisioned as a holistic one for modifications to entrance infill and interior and exterior lighting upgrades, all of which aim to address issues of accessibility, visibility, safety, and security for tenants, their guests, and members of the public.
And 32 Avenue of the Americas has been owned by the Rudin family for over 20 years, and they are very invested in the preservation of this building and are committed to respecting its history while also bringing it into the future. Next. Maybe a bit of a technical, there we go. So the building was constructed in 1930 to 32 as the long distance building of AT&T, one of many telephone buildings designed by Ralph Walker in the Art Deco style during this early 1930s period. And Walker constructed a modern interpretation of a skyscraper with a real emphasis on verticality throughout the building's design, with massive brick walls, punched window openings, and a central entrance portal on 6th Avenue. And the building was very much designed for a single tenant, both inside and out. At the street level, the exterior design was very solid, and this aligned with the interior uses, which are identified on the original floor plan in the right, which were all in service to the specific functioning of AT&T. So spaces were planned for a conference room, supply rooms, and even an employment office, and there was no retail along the base of the building. So many of these details and decisions that were once employed for the original single tenant use are no longer meeting the needs of the now multi-tenanted building. Next. The historic photo at the left is the oldest and best we've been able to find of the 6th Avenue entrance, and it's in an enlarged format here. The articulated bricks around an entrance infill was almost like a curtain of masonry and glass kind of hanging right in front of you. Original doors were located below the large transom, 2 pairs of swing doors and 2 setback revolving doors. And a detail from that original floor plan is on the right.
Apologies.
Showing a very schematic design for the door configuration that does differ somewhat from the photograph. And we unfortunately don't know Walker's original intent for the doors themselves, since even the original elevation drawings indicated nothing about infill design. The entrances were simply shown as voids. Next. And just a quick selection of photos from when the building was designated back in 1991, when the building was actually still utilized by AT&T. And these buildings have helped us determine some of the changes that occurred to the entrances over the years. Next. And then moving inside the designated lobby, the photos start to pick up some of the different zones that exist in the lobby as you make your way from 6th Avenue on the west to Church Street on the east, and I'll describe those in more depth a bit later. But these already start to highlight some of the kind of dark, narrow spaces that result as one moves through the lobby. Next. A couple of existing photos back on the 6th Avenue facade that show the approach when you're walking up from the south. And with the massive street wall and setback doors, it's very difficult to identify the entrance until you're right up next to it, even during the day. There are currently no wayfinding capabilities for the primary entrance to this very large building, and there is a sudden, almost compressed entrance experience once you do finally arrive. I'll also just quickly note here that the retail sign and entrance that are visible in the left photo are a part of a retail and storefront master plan that was approved by this commission in 2013. Next. So the 6th Avenue entrance is composed of a tripartite assembly with a low row of brass swing and revolving doors separated from a large glass transom by a transom bar. And the existing configuration with the numerous doors, solid metal, and tight vestibule immediately within creates a dark, closed-off entry that significantly limits visibility into and out of the space. The only natural light in the lobby actually comes in through these doors. And unlike Walker's other buildings, the transom at this building is an exterior light box, not an actual window. All of the brass doors are very simply detailed with flat stiles and rails, and they contrast quite a bit with the grillwork of the transom, that beveled center pier, and even the richly detailed brickwork of the surrounding portal. The existing infill does appear to be largely historic fabric, although there have been modifications made over time, including brass paneling and fasteners that have been replaced throughout. And perhaps the most noticeable change is the single swing door at the south end, which replaced 2 narrow double doors. This was done at some point post-designation, seemingly in an effort to provide a more accessible entrance. But that door is not truly accessible, and this building is not currently accessible since there is only a call button for assistance from a security guard. Next. Walking around the building to Church Street, there's another entrance that's completely hidden from view until you get right up next to it. And while smaller in scale than the 6th Avenue entrance, this one is regularly used by anyone arriving from the streets or the subways to the east. And it creates an important eastern bookend to the through block lobby. Next. I think unfortunately there's a bit of a delay in the presentation. I'll continue talking about this while it comes up. So at this entry, Walker utilized stone for the surround with a similar combination of narrow swing and revolving doors as he utilized at 6th Avenue. There we go. So here too, the brass door detailing is quite simple. Replacement brass paneling and fasteners have also been installed throughout, and there's a non-historic address letters that have been added above the north doors. One of the interesting things the team found during surveying is 2 historic light boxes located at the soffits. You can see in the right-hand photo there. They're no longer in use and they've been infilled with solid panels, but part of this project is to actually restore those and bring those back to life. Next. Moving to the interior, the design of the lobby is really a meeting of art and architecture, and it was a collaboration of Ralph Walker with the artist Hildreth Mier. The terracotta world map and ceiling mosaics were intended to represent the importance of the building as a communications hub. And the linear qualities of the gold lines in the ceiling design, as well as in the simple terrazzo floor pattern, represent telephone lines. And there's this inherent movement and how the pattern draws you into and through the space. And the art is beautiful, but it is often in shadow and the lobby is quite dark overall. So these are 2 views of the 6th Avenue end of the lobby. On the left is a view looking at the 6th Avenue entrance where one enters into a double height space. And any light coming into this end of the lobby, as I mentioned, is limited to those 4 doors since that exterior transom is not a window. There is a second set of swing doors and piers that kind of further creates a vestibule, but further closes off the lobby from the exterior light. And I do want to note that the interior doors of the southern bay were previously removed to provide a clear path of entry. I assume that was likely done around the same time that that exterior door was replaced. There are some other non-historic additions that have been made over time, such as those flags and spotlights, which start to detract from the character of the space. And there was also a prior relamping of the historic wall sconces that now creates uneven and glaring light conditions and reflections throughout the lobby. And on the right is the lower ceilinged space that continues east towards Church Street. Next. So just a couple of photos as you move east. The left photo shows more of the center of the lobby where the space starts to get particularly dark as the access to natural light disappears. And the right photo shows the Church Street entrance, which does contain those double vestibule doors at the inner plane. Next. To inform the proposal, the team studied other Ralph Walker telephone buildings in Lower Manhattan that were completed around the same time, including the Barclay Vesey, Western Union, and the Irving Trust Company buildings. And what we found is that Walker embedded a lot of transparency into his designs, particularly at the ground floor. And he linked interior and exterior spaces, not only in terms of design and material, but also through light transmission. Walker regularly utilized large expanses of glass, whether at prominent entrance portals or at storefronts, often creating the appearance of these glazed curtains hanging from the masonry. Next. And Walker's integration of glazing and light becomes even more apparent in these interior views of those same 3 buildings. The light coming through the transoms and windows in combination with uplighting illuminated the lobbies of these buildings and highlighted the architectural details of the walls and ceilings. But this integration of glazing and light wasn't quite incorporated in the same way in Walker's design for 32 Avenue of the Americas. Next. Over the last several years, the Commission has approved a number of proposals for entrance modifications at individual landmarks, which called for the removal of historic and existing fabric and the installation of contemporary glass and metal infill in its place. The West 51st Street entrance at 75 Rockefeller Plaza is shown on the upper left, and the 34th Street entrance at the Empire State Building on the upper right. And the 2 examples at the bottom of the page, one Wall Street on the left, a Walker building, and the Museum of Pop Culture, which was once envisioned for the former B. Altman department store in Midtown, both demonstrate successful interventions of contemporary infill and the bases of large masonry buildings from the 1920s and 1930s. And then I'll hand the presentation over to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to everyone for your attention today to this matter. I think I hope you'll find this as interesting as we do. This is a plan showing the lobby itself. On the left of the plan is Avenue of the Americas. On the right is Church Street. So that primary entrance shows at 1 and 2, and the secondary is over on the right. You can see that it's a fairly long corridor that folds in the middle, and there are elevator lobbies to the north and the south. The plan is a derivative over time. This building was built over time while being occupied, and there are some irregular conditions here in the lobby owing to that. We're going to talk about the doors first, and then the lighting condition. Again, here's the entry condition. You can see the folds of brick above, as described in the original LPC application, and the brass doors below. I think it's pretty conspicuous how difficult it is to see into the space through these doors. And you can see the light box there on the right. This is a view at night. I thought this would be very important to include. It is shockingly dark on this part of 6th Avenue. There's a park across the street. There's one street light diagonally across the street over on Walker. And then there's one further down closer to Lisbonart. You can see how little light there is projecting onto the street. And on Church Street, it's a particularly discreet, is a nice way to put it, entrance. A lack of visibility through, and again at night, it's a similar condition. But there are more streetlights here, which help. What's interesting is that Julie mentioned there's so little retail here. There's very little presence and accessibility visually to the building from the street. And the Church Street entrance reflects that, I think. This is showing the overall elevations. You can see again what's happening at street level and on Church Street. So here is an elevation of what we are proposing to increase the accessibility and also the security at this level, and frankly, improve the visibility of the interior. We're looking at replacing the doors with larger glass doors, which we think will help with the transparency and visual accessibility of the landmark lobby inside. This is a good example of what we were trying to solve for. Here are 4 individual lobbies on the left, they're vestibules. You can see that the depth is about 12 feet at its worst condition and just under 4 feet at its best condition. The existing is here on the left. This vestibule in particular is 12.5 feet long, and it's only 42 inches wide. This is a similar condition. These doors are 6 feet in radius, but they're also quite sandwiched. Because of the angle of the lobby relative to the street, visibility is extremely challenged. We're proposing to change from 4 vestibules to 2. We're showing new accessible doors, right and left here. The one on the right will be designated as truly accessible and will have an actuator as well. The doors are, the revolving doors are new, and we've oriented them to be flush with the 6th Avenue facade, as opposed to diagonal here on the other facade, on the existing part. We've also maintained an interior column and an exterior piece of beautiful bronze work that's existing here that emphasizes the vertical. We did not want to create one giant vestibule. We're maintaining the ceiling, the lighting, and the sidewall materials throughout this new twin vestibule that we've created. I should add also that we had removed the interior doors to further enhance the visibility and also make it easier to penetrate. This view shows the existing on the left and how visually impenetrable it appears, and also on the right, where it's we spent a lot of time studying this. I should add that the proposed doors are custom, that they have solid brass frames around them and an 8-inch brass base as well. And you can see the vertical panel here, which is exquisite in the existing condition that we want to maintain. And a view from the interior, you can see the central column here, which is an extension of all the interior tile work. We've got the 2 revolving doors in the existing condition, and then what we're showing in the proposed. Something that appeals to me in particular is that the lobby is open to the public. The building is really enthusiastic about handing anybody who walks in a brochure about the historic significance of the lobby, but it is visually impenetrable from the street. And I'm hoping that this will improve its accessibility to the general public. I think very few people appreciate that this is there as they walk by. Here, the condition of lighting for the exterior. We're proposing on the exterior to illuminate that enormous frame. On the interior, in the remaining 2 vestibules, we are looking to reuse the existing light fixtures that are there today, distributed slightly differently, and then improve the overall lighting within this compressed transformation area. And on the exterior here, we're adding, we're actually restoring an existing light that's throwing light down onto the sidewalk. This example is of illuminating an elevation through recessed light fixtures. These are 3-foot by, I think, 2-inch light fixtures that will illuminate this facade. The goal is to achieve the effect on the right. So if the daytime effect on the left is this recessed Walker strategy, the one on the right is the same strategy. And rather than doing what we saw in some of the other precedents as a canopy, we thought we would illuminate the surfaces of this portal, this vestibule, to increase its visibility from the diagonal as you're walking up and down the dark street. We're also restoring the lighting and improving the lighting within the light box, which was done originally in the 90s. And on the Church Street side, similar approach, improved visibility, same bronze doors, and proposing the same bronze doors. The signage we're continuing to look at. Similar strategy to simplifying the vestibule conditions. Here, there were already 2. We will keep the 2. We're upgrading and improving the visibility, again, going to single doors and improving the accessibility as much as we can. We cannot achieve true accessibility on this side. And here's a visual of that. We're adding uplights in this case to help frame the interior with light of this opening. And additional lighting we're restoring that lights down onto the sidewalk. You can see the interior view here and the transformation in visual transparency and accessibility. And here's a rendering of the exterior. Within the lobby, the Hildreth mural is really important to us and to everyone. It's spectacular. I mean, the fact that this is a woman who worked with Ralph Walker in many instances in this spectacular way, it speaks to the long distance company function of the building. It speaks, I think it's significant that it's a woman because the building was largely occupied upon opening in 32 with thousands of women who operated most of the communication devices. They were also referred to as, both in the LPC application and through another author, as weavers of speech. There's a border, which Julie mentioned, around the lobby, which seems to reflect a woven pattern. And it's speculated that that was a venture by both Hildreth Muir and also Walker. Julie mentioned the lighting in the space. It's extremely dark from church and in this transformation, this little transfer area here in the back. The light fixtures were increased in illumination back in the late 90s in an effort to improve the overall light level and to try to improve the lighting on the ceiling. Honest to its original intent, they retained the indirect lighting. The problem is these light fixtures, once enhanced, are so bright that they take your eye away from what's happening on the ceiling and on the walls. And I find the contrast makes it even harder to see. Here's an example of the mural on 6th Avenue, the existing light fixtures, which they retained as much of the original as possible from the 90s, and we intend to do the same. Here's a diagram of the light fixtures. There's a variety. The reds show the existing wall sconces. We intend to keep every one of them and improve every one of them as well. There's an area on the right of the plan here, these number 7 fixtures. They are existing and they will remain. We are looking to add lighting recessed into the floor. And it appears to be a lot of these lights in the plan, but the intent is that they're fairly low illumination and very specific in what they do. As the space was originally indirectly lit, and these tiles are spectacular and have not been touched, and the murals on the ceiling, obviously we'd never want to touch, we eventually looked at lighting from the floor. which is the obvious way to maintain in kind the idea of the indirect lighting. Here is a diagram showing the strategy, which are fairly discrete lights used frequently to help illuminate both the features of this wall, which show the verticals, obviously emphasizing Walker's verticals, but also providing a more even illumination on the ceiling, especially focused on the border, which I think is so beautiful. Here's the light fixture we're proposing. It is only 1.5 inches overall, and the interior light source is a fraction of that. This is a photo of a mock-up of the actual fixture with the dark bronze trim on the dark brown terrazzo, which comprises the border. In the condition over by the mural in the front, the enormous mural, that's harder to achieve, that even level of light through these pointed light sources. And we're looking at a linear fixture, which is similar to the one on the exterior. And then we have conditions of the mock-ups. This is showing the existing wall with the beautiful tile work and the verticals, and also the mock-up of the actual fixture, not recessed into the floor, but laying on the floor, and the overall effect that it creates on the ceiling. Here you can see how uneven it is, and here it becomes much more even. In addition to adding these fixtures, which will be dimmable, we're also looking to re-lamp the existing fixtures and make them dimmable so we can adjust them to what we think will be the right level to complement all the conditions. Here's another example, photoshopped to show what we're doing along the sides. And an example here of what we're doing on the mural side. I think this in the mock-up was by far the most effective. It was really stunning. I should add that with the bronze doors in the front, all of that the owner tends to retain so that we can restore the original facade if desired in the future.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll see if there's public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you, and I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. We do have some signups in advance, and our first speaker will be Michelle Arbalou. And Michelle, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC appreciates the goals of this minor intervention, but has a few concerns. The new door design seems too glassy and would benefit from maintaining the beefier styles and rails and keeping or reinterpreting the strong double horizontal door pulls on the exterior of the building as they currently exist. The interior lighting seems a bit too much, and while we understand that brightening up the space and illuminating the lobby's exquisite details would be nice, we wonder if it could be accomplished with fewer fixtures. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Lucian Reynolds, the Community Board. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Sonia. Hi, everyone, commissioners. My name is Lucian Reynolds. I'm the District Manager of Manhattan Community Board 1. I'm just reading a little bit of our resolution on this item on behalf of our Vice Chair, who was not able to make this meeting. CB1 recommends that the Landmarks Preservation Commission reject any proposal for 32 Avenue of the Americas that consists of removal of any original materials, that the applicant work with staff to improve accessibility into the building while using as many of the existing doors, minus vestibules, as possible, and that any new doors needed for accessibility reflect the style and materials used in the original doors. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Megan Weatherby. And Megan, if you could unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you to the Landmarks Preservation Commission for your time today. I'm Megan Weatherby, the Executive Director of the Art Deco Society of New York. ADSNY cannot support this application because it introduces alteration to architect Ralph Walker's facade and interior spaces at the cost of removal of original historic fabric. In the designation reports for the interior landmark and individual landmark, the commission noted how both the exterior and interior of the building remain, quote, largely as completed in 1932, end quote. To that end, the wholesale removal of the original bronze entries is inappropriate. The doors described as a, quote, bronze base in the designation report appear to be in fine condition and were designed specifically for this building. Introducing a larger ratio of glazing undermines the aesthetic intent of the building's Art Deco style. This rarefication of bronze for glass erodes the material legibility that is so crucial to this style and negatively impacts one's experience of both the structures inside and outside of the building. As to the lobby, our preservation committee found the proposed lighting scheme to be at odds with the original illumination. Lighting of this time period is absolutely underlit by today's standards, but lobbies are transitional spaces. The applicant has the freedom to illuminate the non-designated spaces of this landmark in any fashion they please. No new lighting solution for this interior should come at the cost of destroying original terrazzo, and we ask the LPC to direct the applicant to find a non-surgical reversible solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Christina Conroy. Christina, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, good morning, commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Victorian Society comments on this proposal because of the building's roots in the early part of the 20th century and because of its exceptional importance as a nearly intact example of its style and type, and in the unified relationship of the exterior and the designated interior lobby. We have seen the fragility of this relationship with recent losses of undesignated but significant lobbies. We are firmly opposed to the proposed entrance infill changes. This building was carefully detailed in all respects. Entrances to such buildings are often the most carefully designed features of all and reflect the fact that they are the focus of daily public interaction with the building. Original design should be changed only for the most critical of functional reasons, not for aesthetic preferences or to make the building look more like a typical modern office building. The existing infill suits the character of the building. The proposed does not. Issues with access through the double doors can be solved in other ways. Operators of a building that reflected the height of technological progress in its day can surely find a way to add automatic operation to double doors. In fact, this is touch tone phone era technology already in use in countless retails and office locations. On the other hand, the proposed theatrical lighting additions at the entrance exteriors seem fitting and appropriate, as these entrances are called out as proscenium-like in the designation report. Now, regarding the proposed interior lighting, we think the contrast between the brightness of the outdoors with wide street fronting of the building entrances and the dimly lit lobby was intentional. Some increase in lobby lighting, especially of the mural, could be accommodated without significantly altering the lobby's character. However, the number of proposed new light fixtures is quite excessive, as is the damage the installation of so many fixtures would do to the designated floor. This part of the proposal needs to be rethought. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we do not have any other signups. And I do not see any hands raised, so I will turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks to the speakers. So I'd like to turn back to the applicant team and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. I think Robert will begin by addressing some of the comments about the design.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I like all of the comments, actually. They're all incredibly thoughtful. I want to make sure I address all of them. I would say with regards to the lighting, this was a difficult challenge for us because it is conspicuous when you enter the building that the lighting is not effective in appreciating the lobby. I agree that the lighting levels of 1932 would have been a bit lower. The trouble is we look at it today as a commercial office building with multi-tenants. Previously, it was built for a single user in its entirety, and they did not need to appeal to a general public. In fact, I suspect that's what had a lot to do with having a very closed facade on the exterior. And I'll come back to the doors, but the doors themselves are very closed as well. I think as the largest communications center, not only for the Americas, but also globally, they probably had an issue with security. Maybe they don't have the turnstiles that we have today, but I think they wanted to be mindful of that. There were thousands of people coming through the building, most of them women, which I find absolutely fascinating. And there is an access to the subway, which I didn't point out, to the ACE trains below. But these corridors are incredibly narrow, maybe appropriate for 1932, but I think the best way to describe it is you kind of have to see it yourself. And that's not a nice thing to say. I just mean, they're very tight. 42 inches is very narrow to pass another person who you don't know well. And the height of those is only 7'4". We'd really like to improve what doesn't seem to work about the existing condition. The other issue is with accessibility. Actually, if we could put the twin doors on an actuator, that would be great. If we do, we're still not compliant with accessibility. We have minimum dimensions to meet, and there's still a requirement that you meet those dimensions and that the door swing have a certain amount of clearance on the other side. And then the lighting I touched on. So the lighting is a big challenge. We looked at adding light fixtures in the ceiling. That's a no-go. I would never want to touch that ceiling. We looked at adding additional sconces on the wall. Also, I think I would never touch those tiles if we can. When sprinklers were added as required back in the day, they were done very discreetly in just a few of the tiles. I thought that was well done. And when we thought about the floor, we looked at terrazzo. It is a dark brown terrazzo. It is the most readily reproducible part and component of the entire lobby. We would need to match the color of the brown in any restoration, or if we chose to remove the lights at a future date. But we know we can achieve that much more readily than replacing the beautiful historic tiles, and certainly not wanting to touch the ceiling. I hope that I've touched on all the comments.
Robert, I was hoping to just add, I know there were some concerns expressed about the removal of the historic fabric at the doors. Just wanted to reiterate that there have certainly been modifications made over the years. Everything that's there now is not from the original 32 construction. And we're really looking to celebrate the most elaborately detailed and designed aspect of the entry infill, which is that beautiful transom and the grille work and that transom bar, and really add to it with the new proposal. Ownership has also committed to salvaging any materials that are removed for storage on site. So those will always be accessible going forward.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, not seeing any questions. I'm sending you all requests to unmute so we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. All right, and Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So move.
And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion now. And there are, two components really, the changes to the entrances and then the lighting. And I will say, just to provide some context before we kick off our discussion, that the commission has approved modifications to entrances of our individual landmark office buildings, many of which were built for single tenants and to accommodate the need for multi-tenants and the flow, and in some cases other equipment and things that needed to be moved in, we have always allowed flexibility at entrances. So for example, we've allowed changing a configuration of 4 swing doors to a pair of swing doors with mullions flanking them and doors on the outside, or changing out, which we did at the Bowery Savings Bank, which was actually under a special permit on 42nd Street, or changing out revolving doors for swing doors, which we've done many times. And also changing out the operable leaves of doors with heavier framing, and replacing those with doors with lighter rails and styles, as we've done throughout Rockefeller Center, for example. So these, in all of those cases, while there were changes to the configuration or framing profiles and details, the commission found them appropriate because they worked within the historic materials palette and detailing. So that's something to think about as you think about this application. The other thing with respect to lighting, the commission, because the wattage is challenging to enforce, the commission has historically looked at the size, placement, and number of fixtures and their impact on a space versus the amount of lighting. And I know this is a tricky thing to think about in an interior designation, because interior designations are so atmospheric in a way because of their finishes, and how they're lit can have an impact on that. But I think that's something also to think about in terms of our sort of regulatory practice, and why we've sort of limited it to the fixtures and the impact of the fixtures versus the wattage. So with that context, we'll go ahead and start the discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
Sure, if I'm unmuted. Okay. So, these former telephone buildings, the AT&T building, the former New York Tel buildings, they're very interesting. I mean, architecturally, they're extremely interesting, but it's also interesting to me that, yes, they were all single-use buildings, and there's something always formidable and unapproachable about them, and almost Darth Vader-like in a way. So, and it's interesting that many of them are being, adapted to new uses, and it's a challenge to figure out how to maintain the architectural integrity of what's there, but make sure that they function properly as they become, in some cases, residential buildings. And in this case, a building that is going to be an office building, continue to be an office building, but have multiple tenants. And as we know, the work world is different today. The way these buildings are entered and left are different at different times of day. I mean, it's just a whole different world. So I can appreciate the applicants needing to make sure that the current uses or the new uses are being considered as part of this project, while trying, I think, very hard to respect what exists here and to add in a way that doesn't necessarily detract from the building's integrity and the integrity of the design. So, with all that said, I'm probably going to say something that is nobody will agree with, but looking at the entry here, and I'm just going to, if we could just move to, and I think this applies to all of the doors, but if we could just move to page 29. Is that 29? I have the front, I have the front entrance as being 29, but it might not be. Yeah, that's it. I was trying to think of how to best consider this. And I was thinking that, when we look at, when we try to problem solve our windows, and consider, multi-pane windows versus, 1/1s. We think about the architectural decorativeness of the building and whether or not the building can hold up if we get a little more spare in terms of the windows. And so I just try to look at this project from that perspective, because there is a new use here. We do need accessibility. And in looking at not only the framing of the entrance ways, but also, the transom and all of the glass and metal work above, I guess I feel that the entrance can handle this without detracting from the architecture or diminishing it in any way. So I'm actually okay with it. If some commissioners, believe that it might make sense to make the metal surround a little wider, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I also appreciate the need to get light into this lobby, which not only is going to have a lot of traffic, and I agree, yes, the lighting levels in lobbies, modern lobbies today, is much different, but there's beautiful, there are beautiful murals in there and other elements that would be wonderful if a little light could get in for people to see. So I'm okay with this. And then in terms of the lighting on the inside, I appreciate the fact that this is, again, it's a difficult task for the applicant. You don't want to do the ceilings. You don't want to put the lighting on the columns. The terrazzo's easier to match, and can be the work on the floor can be relatively unobtrusive and understated. So what I would suggest, so my feeling is this is a good approach, and I would recommend that the applicant work closely with staff on this to make sure that the amount of lighting makes sense, so that the lobby gets lit, but it's not overlit, and it doesn't sort of become something else. So that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for those helpful comments. Commissioner Jefferson?
These architects are extremely sensitive and they think through a lot of issues, both programmatically and aesthetically. And this is a difficult one for me because when they talked about the doors and accessibility, they didn't mention the lighting. And they claimed that they wanted to have more glass in the door to get more light in. But in fact, what they wanted to do was by lighting it, they did that. So they accomplished that task. The issue for me is that the existing doors, especially the bottom, is very strong. It's very powerful. The proportions are nice. And I could accept this if they had the handrails in, because the horizontal movement against all these vertical movement is quite a powerful element, subordinate but powerful to the organization of these doors. So that's A on that. And in the interior part, these older buildings, the atmosphere, the darkness was important. I mean, they did that because they wanted a certain kind of darkness that we don't appreciate anymore. We want everything to be bright and light, see the details. They had a different perception of that. And this is an individual landmark. So I'm questioning whether, how far should I go on this? I'm modern too. And how much light you should put in, how much stuff you should put on the floor. I don't know. I think part of it could be dark, not everything, 40-foot candles or 50-foot candles, but portions of it could be thought through, darker, lighter. And some of the elements, the major elements, art on the wall, perhaps could be lit from the floor. But these things have to be resolved with staff. I don't have a firm conviction.
Okay. So work with staff on the amount of lighting. And yeah, and I mean, I guess I would say because the sort of quality of light is not something that we traditionally have been ever really regulated or enforced because it's so difficult to enforce. It's also something that is not described in the designation report for the interior space. So the designation report would speak to the fixtures and finishes, but not necessarily the quality of the lighting, as that's such an ephemeral thing. It may not be what it was anyway. So I guess that's a way to think about it as well. All right, Commissioner Gustafson.
Okay, with regard to the doors, we have two justifications here. One is about accessibility, and the other one is about allowing light into the space. To the extent that it is necessary to replace the doors in order to acquire that accessibility, I can't object to that. But I don't think that's true. I think most of this is about the light, and that in terms of removing the significant Art Deco detailing of those doors, I can't support it if it's just for the basis of adding light to the lobby. And in terms of the lighting that's being added inside, I'm not sure that I buy the multi-tenant concept at all, which is to say there are many other ways to provide wayfinding other than stadium lighting. We are all capable of reading, and there are ways to make that reading possible with adequate signs and lit signs. So I'm not, as it stands, I'm not in favor of certainly of the change in the doors. I think there is a unique beauty to these entrances, and I think those are features that we did call out. In terms of the lighting, I'm sure that some additional lighting is justified. I don't think that the level at which the changes are being made here is justified.
Okay, thank you. And I do think, when we have approved changing the configuration of historic doors and entrances to individual landmark, and particularly office buildings and other individual landmarks, and including making the framing thinner on doors and the glazing bigger. And I think, if it's done in similar materials and detailing, and I think in this case, as Commissioner Lutfi said, one could think of this entire monumental piece as the entrance. And when you sort of prioritize which parts are most robust or detailed and which parts are the most plain, those operable doors for me fall into that category. And I think that the overall ensemble is strong enough that it can handle that. And also, knowing that we have done it at other individual landmarks. So that gives me comfort, but I certainly understand your feeling about it. Okay, Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Yes, I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made with respect to probably the original design intention. The building, is meant to be, I think, cavernous and cool on the inside, and among the kind of the variety and series of cathedrals to industry that predominated in this, in the beginning of last century. So that kind of feeling that you have in a cathedral, even though in a cathedral the light is another, the other aspect, which is light and color from the light is important. The kind of the weightiness and the sort of seriousness of the atmosphere of the interior is something that's really, I think, it was very much intended. So I don't think it's just an issue of sort of darkness. It's the kind of this severe, cool, cavernous space. And so I don't think it's about changing that atmosphere entirely. And I don't think that the applicants are proposing to do that. I think that the proportion of this entry element is so grand and so weighted from above to below. In other words, the door elements are such a small percentage of that and seem to continue to remain under the weight of that heavy drapery of backlit or, this one-sided glass, which is very interesting and a little bit strange. That I don't think that they suffer from being changed to what is proposed right now, meaning that the removing some of that opaque material does not undermine the kind of, again, the proportions of that entry and the continued feeling of weight as you've walked in. So I think it's possible. I think that there should be, and I can't quite tell where the datum lines from if it is granite, sort of base on the kind of the base of the building seems to have a number of different datum lines, and I'm wondering if those should be drawn. They seem to be currently an alignment between the granite, if it is granite, and the bronze bulkhead, bottom line. But there seems to be another line as well, and I'm just wondering if that can be pulled into the kind of the bottom dimension that they're proposing. With respect to the lighting, I think that there is something interesting about these circular floor lights in that they sort of are the way that the architects have eliminated all these other possibilities, the ceilings, the columns, otherwise. I think that was the right these were the right steps to take. But I actually think that they hit on something with the floor lighting. There's sort of something deco about it, about lighting the floor with those very small circular port kind of elements and in a dotted kind of way. I don't think it takes away from this interior experience. So I would be happy to, for us to think about how many and if as many as they've proposed, but I actually think it's all alternatives, it's the right approach. So for the most part, I can support most things that are being proposed here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I agree with many comments that have been made already, but I think that the lighting, that it's appropriate to have some interior lighting. I would like the staff to work with the applicant to make sure that that is appropriate to the space and to, making sure that there is some additional illumination for things like the murals, for example. I'll call them murals, but anyway, the depictions of the maps. With regard to the doors, I feel that additional glazing is appropriate. We have permitted that kind of thing in some other comparable buildings. What I found most kind of comparable from my perspective was the Empire State Building. And I feel that there is a need for some horizontal bar there. I think Commissioner Jefferson also suggested that, because these are very weighty doors. And I think that you shouldn't lose entirely the sense of verticality. I mean, horizontality and weight, while adding some additional glazing here. So I guess that's really it. I can approve it, but with the provision they'll work with the staff on the lighting, and there would be some horizontal element introduced, like the push bars. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. I think that Adi hit it right on the head with the lighting, interior lighting comment. Hugh Ferris, all of his drawings are lit from some subterranean source, and they single-handedly defined the world's view, our view of the Art Deco period, of which this building is an exemplar. So I also think that the lighting proposed on the interior is not going to make these spaces have a modernistically lit quality. They are very focused, very narrow, wall washing and ceiling hitting in narrow places fixtures. They are not overall general area lighting. They are not uplighting in a kind of space lighting sense. They're very much accent lighting, which is completely appropriate to, I think, this kind of space. And I agree that the terrazzo is easily repaired if technology changes and for some reason they want to change it. I don't think that that's a problem. We've allowed limited holes in terrazzo for electrical devices in the past. I think that the comment about adding horizontality to the glazing at the entrances is right on the money. But I don't think that it would in any way diminish the ability of the architects to do what they want to do in terms of changing the doors, changing the vestibules, increasing the overall glazing and visual penetration into the space. I think it would just be a nice decorative element. And what I would suggest is that looking at the push bars that are on the doors now, which may be original, they may share a proportional relationship with the ladder type metal work, lattice work in the transoms above. And they should, the staff might want to look at that with them to have that relationship, if that was deemed intentional to be carried over into the new. But I think in general, this is a very, very careful, thoughtful, appropriate intervention. And I do want to say that the applicant's citing of this building as changing, really viewing it as an adaptive reuse, it is very, it struck with me. I think that this was a building that was, had a different meaning and import when it was built than it does now. And its use as a multi-tenant building that is much more outward facing than this probably was at the time when it was really a lines building and it had limited public access. I think that makes a big difference in how you view it. And I don't think that the changes proposed would alter the historic value of the building in any significant way.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, very interesting discussion. Because for years I passed by this building and to the bank, and I never noticed where the main entrance is, or I couldn't decide which is the main entrance. And I think Abby and Michael Goldblum hit it right on the head, which is that this is a cathedral to communication in a different era in a different industry. And the difference between, I was thinking more like how would you lit the inside of the Rockefeller Center arcades, because, and the applicant is also correct, the lighting interior is a challenge given the limitation of not touching the ceiling, not touching the wall fixtures. And I'm glad that Commissioner Goldblum mentioned about Hugh Ferris, because in lighting, you do not want the light from below. It gives you the Boris look, that gives you the horror look. But in this case, you have no option. And I think the applicants talk about a horizontal strip, or maybe I do recommend that they work with the staff, continue to explore, because if it's a normal cathedral, you have the stained glass window to light you from the side, and you don't have that option here today. And I think that the comment about the front door, I have no problem with the front door, and I totally agree with all the commissioner's suggestion about the proportion about a horizontal push bar, and I think that can be done. I think that will go a long way. But work with the staff and at least let the public know where the main entrance is.
Okay, all right, great. And Commissioner Bland, I don't know if you've been here enough for enough of it.
No, I've been listening. I just had to walk around, sorry.
Okay.
And didn't need to expose my walking around everyone. This building is a different building than the one that was built as in 1932, its use. Subtly different, but nonetheless different. Any building that can't change over time to accept these uses is ultimately maybe even doomed. That's maybe a little bit hyperbole, but it's a challenge. So it seems to me like these changes that are being suggested here are very subtle and I would say appropriate. If a horizontal bar needs to be added, I don't think it does, but if it does, I'm not against that on these doors, but certainly opening up and rearranging the layout, I think is terrific for the current use and very appropriate. An Art Deco interior is nothing if not theatrical. The lighting, and thank goodness for Hugh Ferris being brought in, one of my favorite guys in history. Thank you, Michael Goldblum. The introduction of these lights, again, I think working carefully with staff to be sure the right number, but I think the reversibility of them, if necessary in the future, that adds to its allure. But uplighting and just increasing the light and maybe the drama of the space seems not to be antithetical to its original use to me. So again, working with staff on the lighting, I'm fine with everything as being proposed. And I love the discussion among us too. I thought it was very interesting.
It was interesting. Great. Thank you all so much. Okay, so I think we have enough to approve it, with a few details to continue to work with the staff on the number of light fixtures, to confirm the number of light fixtures, and to add a horizontal element like a push bar to the doors. And I think they could also study the bottom rail, as Commissioner Shamir Baran suggested, in terms of the datum lines at the base of the building. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you be able to make that motion?
Sure. Okay, oops. I just, wait a minute, my computer's. Okay, in the matter of docket 23-00178, 32 Avenue of the Americas, long distance building of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, individual and interior landmark, an Art Deco style skyscraper with an Art Deco style interior lobby designed by Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Mellon, built in 1911 to 14 and enlarged in 1914 to 16, and again in 1930 to 32 by Voorhees, Mellon, and Walker. The application is to alter entrance infill, install exterior lighting, and install floor-mounted lighting within the designated interior lobby. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed replacement of the existing entrance infill on both 6th Avenue and Church Street will provide barrier-free access and will increase the penetration of natural light into the vestibules and lobby and visibility into the landmark space. that the new entrances set within an existing assembly dominated by monumental transom and surrounded by more prominent masonry elements will feature simple and clean contemporary infill, and the proposed work will not detract from the significant or prominent unifying features of the building design. That the design of the proposed entrance infill, featuring glassy revolving and single doors within thin brass framing, will feature materials and details that will relate harmoniously with the facade and maintain the composition of the historic entrances. That the light fixtures affixed to the building at the entrance portico will be simple in design and proportionate to the entrances. That the lighting installed in the plain terrazzo flooring in the interior landmark will not damage historic fabric, is unobtrusive, and will highlight the special murals that are poorly lit presently, thereby enhancing the landmark space. And that the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic integrity of the individual landmark or interior landmark spaces. I recommend though, that the applicant work with staff on in two areas. First, in terms of the front doors, to install some a horizontal push bar-like bar, working with staff, similar to the existing condition, to be in keeping with the proportions of the Art Deco elements found at this landmark, and to also work with staff to study the bottom of the doors in terms of its datum. In addition, in terms of the lighting, I recommend that the applicant work closely with staff on the numbers of lights and on the level of lighting that's going to be installed.
Great, thank you. All right, Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
I'll call.
Oh, John, thank you.
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Nay.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
8 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion passes.
Right, so that's approved. Please continue to work with the staff on those details. And commissioners, we are now about an hour behind schedule. So we're going to break for lunch now and come back at 1:15, and we will resume with the next item on the agenda, which is the stair at Lehigh Building. So we will ask the members of the public to voluntarily leave the meeting now so that you don't have technical difficulties getting back in at 1:15, and we will see everyone in a half an hour. Thank you.